off with this in this good way as we talk about one of our most sacred foods for our Anishinaabe people. And as I sing this song and as I go into this morning, I remember the very beginnings of the American Indian movement and the Red Schoolhouse and Heart of the Earth School where I graduated. But Red Schoolhouse is where our Three Fires Society kind of was born from. And we used to, as a teenager, I used to attend these Three Fire ceremonies. And it was so small that we were in a teepee and everything was done in a language. And our Three Fires traditional Ojibwe society, Madawan society, is the lifeways, the traditional lifeways and teachings of our Anishinaabe people. And so through learning these ways, these traditional ways, I have a lot of ancestors and relatives that have gone on before me that walked these ways and spoke of and, you know, gave their lives for, so that we could today, so I could sit here and I could share this song with you. And so that my grandchildren can learn these songs and all of our, you know, and we pass this knowledge from the past to the future through songs and ceremonies and gatherings and sharing as we're going to do today. So with that, I want to start with a song that one of our head women singers composed with her grandchild about the water. And if any of you know it, you're welcome to join me. I don't know if that can happen. Shannon might know it. I don't know if they can put us on at the same time, but the Nibi song, so. Oh, I heard that little puppy barking. Okay. Nibi Gizhaadaandaa Kimi Gwachowe Nemi Gizhawe Nemigu Nibi Gizhaadaandaa Kimi Gwachowe Nemigu Gizhawe Nemigu Nibi Gizhaadaandaa Kimi Gwachowe Nemigu Gizhawe Nemigu Nibi Gizhaadaandaa Kimi Gwachowe Nemigu Gizhawe Nemigu. So that song, the Nibi song, it says, water, we love you. Water, we thank you. And water, we respect you. And we sing, we think of the teachings that we've heard from our elders about how we interact with life around us. And that water carries that life, and that water carries our sacred food, the Minomin. So miigwech.
Miigwech, and thank you for starting us off in a good way today. We welcome everyone that has come to join us. I will move over to our other co-host from United Tribes of Michigan, distinguished and respected Elder Frank Edward Gishik. Please, you have the floor.
Ani, pipigwao do dem waganak sing and donjaba, nakwe Gishik and Dishnikas. I'm real honored to be able to be here today to welcome folks for this webinar It's been a long time in coming, and we've been getting ready for it and doing a lot of planning. We lined up good speakers, and I'm hoping that all the technical things work out fine for us today. What's so important in understanding and protecting things is, and thanks for Lisa for singing that song on the water. As you can see, I like the water. I have the water in the background for my picture here, but water is one of the elements in that we have. But we also, that we have the air, fire, and the earth, and from all of these things, with all of this, we get our sustenance, our shelter, and our foods, and it's becomes a way of life. And the idea of our traditional foods and how that helps our spirits and helps the world as a whole when we respect all of these foods and do the best we can to bring them into our lives and to perpetuate those ways. When things that we know, we can pass them on. For things that we need to relearn because we may have lost them, we find ways to relearn those. And so this webinar is sort of based on all of those different things. United Tribes of Michigan is pleased to co-host this, and I look forward to the day. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Frank. So we have some words of introduction here. I'm going to slide in quickly on behalf of International Indian Treaty Council, and then I'll go back and pass it back over to Lisa Bellinger. She will be able to do any more words of welcome that she would like, and then we'll go ahead and enter into our first panel. First, I just want to say it's an honor to be here with you all today on behalf of International Indian Treaty Council, Rochelle Diver, Indigenous, Fond du Lac, and Yunjiba, Minneapolis, Indira. My name is Rochelle Diver. I come from Fond du Lac Reservation. I grew up in the town just next to it, Duluth, Minnesota, and I currently live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I, like I said, really honored to be moderating today. We have such a distinguished group of panelists and elders and traditional knowledge holders joining us today, and we really hope that we put together a wonderful webinar for you. I know that the sacred Minomin is something that's very close to our hearts here in the Great Lakes and beyond. For many of us who have left our homelands and live other places, I know for me when I was doing that, the Minomin is what kept me centered wherever I was. I always had some with me. So today we really come together to honor and respect and protect and defend the Minomin today. So I would like to call through the chat for people to send any recommendations that they might have in regards to protecting, honoring, and defending our Minomin. At the end of this, we will have an outcome document with a set of recommendations that we can use for advocacy efforts with our tribes, with US agencies, EPA, State Department, anyone who is putting out regulations that will impact our food, our water, and our environmental health. So I just want to give a tiny little bit of background here on behalf of International Indian Treaty Council. This conference was requested by the late Pat Bellinger, sending my love and respect to her, a powerful advocate for Indigenous peoples who was at the founding of IITC in 1974 in Standing Rock, South Dakota, and served for many years on IITC's board of directors. She affirmed the need to protect our sacred water, food sovereignty, and traditional practices around Minomin. And this conference today honors her work, her family, her life, and her spirit that we know will be with us today. So with that, I say thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. And Lisa, I am passing the floor back to you. Please, thank you.
Bonjour, miigwech Rochelle, and miigwech Frank for those beautiful words. I'm really honored and excited to see this conference, even though it's kind of online and in the clouds. But you know what? That was my mom's Ojibwe name, Awanakwe, Cloud Woman. So I guess it's fitting. So Um, I am so happy to see the beautiful work that has been put into this conference and finally coming today. The work of wild rice, the issue, it has so many realms that we have to honor and acknowledge. And I know that we'll go into some with today's gathering. You know, we look at with the Treaty Council, we have had these corn conferences or food sovereignty conferences, and we look at traditional foods. We look at what how they are related to us. We look at family, intergenerational. You know, how the knowledge is passed, as we talked about. We look at you know, the spiritual cultural meaning, but we also look at the significance of that food in that traditional relationship that we have as a nation, as peoples, with our traditional foods. And, you know, it comes quite commonly that I've heard through the different conferences that I've been to and talking to other Indigenous people about their traditional foods, you know, where there's so many threats to them. You know, some of the threats are as simple as access. Some of those threats are as simple as not having somebody there that you can obtain the knowledge from. You know, like at one point when my daughters were coming of age and I wanted to have a coming of age ceremony, I didn't know who to ask here in the big city of Minneapolis, St. Paul. And so I was told I had to travel to Toronto to find a grandmother that could share with me that information. And then way later I find out that, you know, I just didn't ask the right person here. It was kind of here, but we really weren't doing that ceremony here at that time. So, you know, sometimes it's, again, well, that goes back to access, but also, you know, finding those elders. And, you know, so many of our elders over the years have, in the past, with the boarding schools and the treatment that they receive for sharing this knowledge, for carrying the language forward, you know, with the abuse and punishment, elders are resistant and reluctant to share information, or they buried it so deep they'll say, I don't remember, you know. And then sometimes slowly they'll come back and say, oh, you know what, now I'm starting to remember. You know, it takes some sometimes for them to participate, for them to recall, and maybe the smell of a smudge of sage or cedar that will help to jar that memory. So today we're looking. Again, we have to reach across Anishinaabe King, across our Ojibwe lands to find our knowledge keepers and to share that with everyone today. And so, again, you know, I'm very honored on behalf of my mother and my family to welcome everybody, and let's share in this wild rice story. And part of the original ideas and thoughts were, I talked to one of my friends from the Shakopee community here, and she said, you know, we should have different kinds of rice from the different reservations, you know. And we were going to gather and have people bring this rice in our physical conference, and so that's still yet to come. You know, where you could see wild rice, we were going to put them in like buckets, and then you could look at how rice looks differently from different parts of Anishinaabe King, from our lands, the waters, and be able to taste and eat wild rice for our meals. So I look forward to our actual gathering when we're able to gather again and be able to share rice with everybody. So, miigwech.
Thank you again, Lisa. We really appreciate your opening words and just giving a little bit of context to this. This conference has been a long time coming. We faced many barriers getting it going today. So, and the latter being the pandemic. So we were finally ready to go and have an in-person conference. I guess it was meant to be virtual with you all here today. So one of the benefits of that is we're able to have people join us from all over. I'm seeing attendees starting to come in from all across the United States. So as well, Wild Rice Peoples, we all welcome you to the Great Lakes region. We're so happy that you want to be here to learn more about the wild rice. And we encourage you to chat with us. And this is interactive, and we want to make sure that this is very informal. Everybody feels welcome to participate, to ask questions. If you put your questions in the chat as well, we can pose those to the panelists. I will moderate those on behalf of what you send. So with that, I am going to go ahead and pass it over. So our first panel is the spiritual and cultural meaning and relationship of Minomin to our peoples. I would like to invite our speakers joining us from Michigan today. Our first speaker is Jerry Jandro from Dynamite Hill Farms. I will let him go ahead and introduce himself. Jerry, you have the floor. Miigwech.
Oh, miigwech. Buju nende markaniduk. Gittika buju nende jeneka zaji jakin dudam we kwedonk and tochapano jabwe nishnabe nini and dao. So thank you for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to share here. Just like to let everybody know that I'm actually on a fire assignment right now in northern Minnesota, still in Anishinaabe Waking, but my situation's a little bit different right now, so I might have to jump off here at any moment. But for now, I'd like to share a little bit, I guess, about some of the things that I know that have been shared with me, and I might even cut across all of these, I guess, these different panel sessions, because it's because everything's related. And it's really difficult to kind of stay in your lane, I guess, when you're telling these stories, because they're circular. But I think a good place to start is, and I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but briefly, we as Anishinaabe people came out here to actually find that Minomin and the food that grows on the water. It's a big part of our history as a people. And that's part of the whole Seven Fires prophecy, and that's something that you guys can look up if you're interested. I think some people have put some things out there on the internet now, but it was prophesied that we would exist in the place where the food grows on the water, and that's the wild rice, and that's why we're all here now. And it's not just in the United States, but it's in Canada as well. And when we got here, we found the water, we set up our homelands, and not long after that, was colonization and sort of that westward expansion of the United States. And when that happened, as Ojibwe people, we didn't necessarily fight a war with the United States, but instead we signed treaties. And the biggest takeaway from those treaties and the rights that we retain to this land is access to those foods, to hunt, fish, and gather within our territories, which includes wild rice as a major component of that. And we can talk about that for days on end, really. We're still trying to interpret those things still to this day. I think, as Anishinaabe people, we have a pretty sound understanding of what those rights are, but the federal government doesn't necessarily understand it because that stuff's not taught to them. But what I like to talk about more so is the fact that as Anishinaabe people, we've actually had a treaty that goes back much further in time than the treaties of 1854 and 1842 for my particular community, which is the Keweenaw Indian community in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We have a much older treaty that we recognize and that we still uphold today, and that's what's commonly referred to as the original treaty. And I think that kind of sets the stage, because I know this is kind of like the spiritual and cultural, but I think what what that all means really is what is our relationship to Minomin. And I think that it's kind of captured in the original treaty, where we as Anishinaabe people, when we were first here, everything else in creation was already here before us, and they realized that we're ill-equipped to survive with the gifts that we're just given ourselves. You know, we can't photosynthesize like plants. We don't really have strong muscles. Our eyesight's not very great. Our hearing's okay. We're not very fast, and everything else that was here recognized, you know, our shortcomings as a species. And long story short, they all essentially stood up and offered something to help the Anishinaabe people, and that included the wild rice, the Minomin, and everything in creation. Basically said, we're here to help you, and our responsibility, our relationship with that original treaty is that we're supposed to take care of everything here. We're supposed to help everything around us that allows us to maintain ourselves. And I think that's important to state and to understand, because that really resonates in everything that we do up to this day. You know, when we take our kids out for the first time, we have those conversations with them. We put our same one down. We're still grateful for all those gifts that are shared with us, and allows us to maintain still to this day. And I think that's a very important understanding for those out there, to sort of grasp, I guess, that relationship that we have with that wild rice. It feeds our people. You know, when we're out there, when we're in our canoes, there's a connection there that it's kind of hard to describe. But when you're sitting in that canoe and you can hear that rice falling, and you kick up a couple of the ducks that are out there, the smells and the sounds, it connects you. It connects all of us to our ancestors, because we know that they've heard and smelled and seen all of those same things before too. So I guess maybe that might be some of the spiritual connections there, but it's a relationship. It's understanding that relationship that our ancestors have had with that plant as well. And that really grounds us, you know, and that makes us thankful. And as you go through the process of ricing and finishing the rice, it's a lot of hard work. But even that hard work that we put in there makes us physically healthy. So it's not necessarily just the nutritional value of that wild rice, which is very good for us, but it's the physical aspect, and it's the physical relationship that we have with that plant as well that keeps us healthy. So there's many different aspects to this relationship that keep our people, our Anishinaabe people, healthy. And that's why it's so important to us still to this day, and it'll be important to our people and our culture for as long as I can see out. I don't want to take up too much time, because I know I hope Katie has audio and video ready to go to, my partner Katie Brissett, because I'd really like her to share as well. But just for the people that are on right now, you know, what Katie and I are doing right now is we recently started Dynamite Hill Farms. We have 30 acres on the reservation in Michigan, and we're trying to get back to those original foods. And what we're really trying to do is we're trying to get back to our responsibilities as Anishinaabe people to the land. And the best way to do that is through participation, and it's through ceremony, and it's through putting our hands in the soil. It's having our babies, you know, walking around and interacting with all of those things as well. And that's really what we're trying to do with Dynamite Hill Farms. It's not necessarily our business model is nothing. It makes a lot of people cringe when we talk about our business model, because it's not necessarily about economics driven, but it's really about our responsibilities and maintaining our responsibilities. So that's kind of what we're doing right now. And I'll try to leave it there. And just again say miigwech for this opportunity to share with people. So thank you.
Miigwech, Jerry, thank you so much for joining us today, especially calling in when you are on site fighting fires and helping to protect the land for all of us. We're so glad that you could join us today. And with that, we are going to pass the floor to his wonderful wife, Katie, who leads many great initiatives. They protect our wild rice together. They do maple syruping. They run Dynamite farms. They are quite a powerful duo. So with that, Katie Brissett, you have the floor. Thank you.
Bonjour, can you hear me all right? Yeah. Anin, mangin tote, Miss Kobikong and Dunjaba, Makunzaban and Baba Banin Shnabe when the Kazo Banins, Zigunikwe, and Dashnakas. Oh my, with that amount when you buy and Kakanage, Guga, Nandaka Kingdom, and what that man now. Mutawa Zaga Guining Nago, and with that Miss Kobikong. Mesa Wicking go man Shnabe working Miss O my arm up eating dago the McQueen the monk. My God doesn't the mongo and the Shnabe Monomin when Japitin dagwak or Mekaye Nungum dashin dana naki oma Michigamin working near Wayne to make what you win damin dana no kiankoma. Nishnabe not to see when so and the wabin monk. So bonjour and hello to everyone. And like Rochelle had said, my name is Katie Brissett. Zigunikwe in Dashnaka, so I'm known as Spring by the ones who really know me, I suppose. I'm a Loon Clan member from the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe. Just a little bit of my own personal background. Sometimes that helps, right? We forget that a long time ago, a lot of us, we used to take this time and speak to each other and share together who we're from, right? And that's really important to understand, not just my clan and who raised me up in that way, but who am I from? Where do I come from? I'm coming from Red Cliff. I'm a person who spent most of my life on the water. Jerry will tease me a little bit though, right? He thinks the water is a little different over here in KB, but we know how special we are coming from that beautiful space with all those islands, and closely related to the Bad River bands. And in my upbringing, I was brought up all around the Anishinaabe. I was really fortunate. As a young girl, I spent much of my time with my father and my family, and we would go all over Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Canada. And a good amount of what I was exposed to was not only just who were living in these places and the people that my family was spending time with, but I think, and Jerry kind of brings this up sometimes, that idea of like relation, who I'm learning from. And I think we need to speak to that who piece in a way that maybe reframes for ourselves our understanding. I learned that who I am and who I came from also stems from that place of where I am, where I was exposed, where I spent time. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot, especially down in Lac du Flambeau and the Coudray, in communities that we still to this day over in Fond du Lac, right, hold very dearly, especially to that race. And in that upbringing, in that exposure, and in that time, those older ways kind of came through, that idea of being from this place, from Anishinaabe King, be Nandawab and Damang Ko Anishinaabe and Nadiziwin, as we go and are searching for this Ojibwe way of life. And so that upbringing, where I come from, and also helps me to learn how to explore a little more, right? I didn't just get stuck at home on the res. I've managed to be in quite a few places. I've had some wonderful opportunities down in the Coudray working for the Warukudaring Ojibwe Language Institute as a teacher down there. And now I'm really fortunate. I met this good-looking guy who lives over in Michigan and works with syrup and sugar and rice. And as of right now, in the last about 3 or 4 years, we've been spending our time concentrating, like Jerry said, on a different idea, something that I think has driven us to really analyze, what does that look like, right? Being from this place, what does it mean to be Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, and how is it that we can not only perpetuate that for our own existence, for our children and what we're doing, but to help others in their own efforts, seeking this way of life. Myself, a lot of my training and upbringing has been actually on the community side of this. And so, like I said, I worked at Wadukadaring for a good amount of time. Before that, I worked at home in the Red Cliff Early Childhood Center. And part of the freedoms that I've been allowed in my kind of professional career is this idea of being able to see myself as Anishinaabe in all these places. And even as our tiny littlest ones would be outside, I had a little classroom of 2 and 3-year-olds, and we would be out and we'd be hiking and we'd be telling stories and we'd be visiting. And then it'd become Minomin time, right? It'd be time to bring that rice in. And we'd have someone like Marvin bring in that big, beautiful birch bark canoe, and those babies would have these big stalks of rice next to them, and they would play. That's how they played house. That's where they played pretend. That's they were remembering, I think, is a lot of the conversation that we would have as teachers. You know, these babies know who they are. They know where they come from. A lot of the times it's just us kind of getting in their way, you know, putting them in their classrooms and telling them to go play in the jungle gyms. And so that first upbringing that I really had in terms of what it means to be a part of this community and a part of this this nation as a whole was, you know, working with those little ones and reminding them and reminding myself, you know, who are we? Who are you? Who am I? And what does that mean to us? My next bit of exposure to really understanding who I really am was that really amazing time I got to spend down at Wadukadaring, down in Lakudere, down in LCO. And that time there, we were really fortunate. The program that we belonged to, they found the importance of making sure those Anishinaabe babies were out in Anishinaabe Wakink. And so the program has developed slowly over time, you know, the last 17, 20 years, but in a way that has really decided that first and foremost, we're Anishinaabe, we're Ojibwe. And so the classroom starts where our classroom originated from. And Jerry speaks a lot to that when we talk and we share the little bits of knowledge that we have. You know, we have, like he had said, you know, in those original treaties, we have the original teachers. We have the ones who have taught us, you know, for millennia now, what it means to be Anishinaabe, what it means to speak Ojibwe, what it means to live that in Natasiwin, that life. And so when I was in that education system, I was really, really lucky. I was supported and encouraged to help my students explore themselves as Anishinaabe students, as people of this place. And so we would take them out to the rice beds, and we had a rice camp for them. And when it was rice season, just as when it was sugar season, our students and our teachers, our faculty, we all spent our time with those beings. And that's part of what I think when we talk about, you know, what does it mean to be, we're Dynamite Hill Farms, right? We got a nice fancy name. But what does it mean? What is it that we're actually doing? And part of what we're looking to do is not only for ourselves, trying to find ourselves, right? We were all students who were taken from the classroom, our real classrooms, our real experiences. And here we are, you know, 30 some odd years old, hitting up till 40 and then some, trying to remember, what does it mean to be Anishinaabe? And so we've been taking our time, firstly learning so that we can be exposed and spend time in that place again. But then also bringing who would like to be there with us? How do we get back to that place? Who needs to be here, and how do we get them there? And that piece, reevaluating for ourselves in our lifestyle, you know, what does it mean to be Anishinaabe and to be from this place again? inevitably, as communities, when we start reevaluating that as ourselves, as a whole, that's where these next steps will really take. And we've been really fortunate to have been provided these opportunities, right? Access was one of the first things that I heard when we were on here, right? Access. How do you get there? How do you get to the rice? Where that's a big question here in Michigan. You know, we don't have rice like it is in Fond du Lac. We don't have the same rights that other folks maybe in Wisconsin have, water rights that happen there. And then the rice itself has been unhealthy for such a long time. And so accessing it and understanding what that access alone means, and then the little steps that come as you start to access it, and as you learn again, and as you listen to the way the wind speaks through those, and the way the birds tell you and remind you what those stories really were. And so that's just a little bit of my background, and kind of some of the work that we're doing. I don't know if anyone, Jerry, you want to add anything to that, or if we have more to talk about. But miigwech apache for the opportunity to introduce myself and to share, and hopefully we have a good conversation. Miigwech.
Miigwech to you, Katie. Thank you so much for sharing and calling in from home. And we know you have a little one there as well. So thank you for taking time away from your family and bringing your family on to this webinar with you. With that, I will thank Dynamite Farms. Please stick around. We have some questions popping up in the chat. So we will go ahead and move to the questions after our final panelists. I'd like to welcome once again Lisa Bellinger to share her wild rice journey with us. Miigwech, you have the floor, Lisa.
Bonjour again. Oh, miigwech to Jerry and Katie. That's beautiful. It makes me want to travel to Michigan and go check out the farm. I just started gardening this year with my grandchildren. We have our Three Sisters garden. We have our pickle garden, their cucumber garden, and their pumpkin patch, strawberries. And so I was going to write a webinar or a blog like who ate the first strawberry, because the first strawberry disappeared. But anyways, so I just want to share with you a little bit about our story, and then also throw a plug in here. Currently, I work for St. Paul Schools here in St. Paul, Minnesota as a American Indian specialist with the Indian Education Program and lead teacher for our program, and provide professional development for our staff as well as district-wide staff. And this webinar is part of our district professional development opportunity, so it's very exciting. And also we shared it statewide with our Minnesota Department of Indian Education. And through the St. Paul Schools, we are going to offer CEUs. So if any of you, anybody needs CEUs, continuing education units for their licensure process, here just email Rochelle and she'll forward it to me, and we'll send you out a cute little instruction, and we'll ask for some information and send you off your CEUs for participating today. I believe that when we have something this beautiful and valuable, that the more that we can share about our origins and our lifeways and the importance and our relationship with Earth, whether it's through food, through water, through activity such as canoeing, that we have a better chance of protecting when the threats, are when we have to protect our sources, our resources, and our foods and such. So that's why I really am excited about this webinar. So again, if anybody needs CEUs, contact Rochelle, and then she'll send the information on to me. And she put her email in the side chat. So I just want to share with you a little bit about our family journey, then open up some time for questions. So wild rice, the story is available if you'd like to look. The book that I that I like to share with my children, the stories and stuff, is through our Grand Chief, Edward Benton Benet, Badoi we done. And he was part of the founding conference in Wakapala in 1974 with my mom with the Treaty Council. And he's the founder of Red Schoolhouse, part of the American Indian Movement founding, and as well as our Grand Chief and head spiritual leader and teacher for the Three Fires Society. And he authored a book called the Mishomis Book, The Voice of the Ojibwe. And it has a story about wild rice in there that's kind of been shared, and I'm sure will be continued to be shared throughout this panel this morning. So, you know, as they said, it was foretold, it was prophesied, wild rice. We, as Anishinaabe people, originated on the East Coast and were prophesized, and we were told by a prophet, the prophets and the seers, that we needed to move, and we needed to, there's a whole big long story about that I don't have time to go into. Not even the whole webinar. Shannon knows that. And then, so that our journey to wild rice was prophesized. And so we weren't born here, or this isn't our original homelands. Our original homelands are out east. And so there were people here. And that's the Dakota Nation. And so I have a niece that will be on to share some of that story as well. And I think that one of the things that in coming up in working on this conference and talking to different people is that we need to also acknowledge and honor the fact that wild rice is also a Dakota, part of Dakota lifeways as well. And so I'm really happy that we're going to have Cheyenne on here later to share part of that story as well. So I just wanted to share a little bit about our family's intergenerational racing story. When I was growing up, I grew up half between my tribal homelands in Leech Lake and the Twin Cities. My grandmother was a nurse, and so when she got a job at the university here in Minneapolis, we moved down here, but we spent as much time as we could up north, summers. And for racing time, it was always a big family gathering. And I'm not just talking your nuclear family, you know, mother, father, sister, brothers. We're talking indigenous family, you know, my great-grandpa, my great-grandpa's brother, my other great-grandpa, his family, and then all the way down to the babies. We all had a role and we all had a part in our ricing camp, the family ricing camp. And so, and we would wake up, you know, before the sun would come up, and grandpa was usually grandpa that cooked the breakfast, and we would eat a good solid breakfast, and they'd pack up the food, everybody would pack up, and people would be scurrying about getting ready with getting the canoes tied onto the vehicles, getting everything loaded in, the lunches. And the children, we all went along. The babies didn't necessarily come out with us on the lake, but the young children did. I remember being little, and we would get into a boat, into a canoe, or into the big boat. If you were little, you had to get in the bigger boat. If you were, you know, 10 and up, you could sit in the canoe. And then we would go 4 canoes wide. We would tie behind some boat, a little like fishing boat. And then we would go sometimes 2 or 3 wide, and then a couple back even, and have this little chain of canoes and this boat with a tiny motor. We would put across the bay to the island where the rice bed was. And we'd get up on shore, and we'd have to hold on to each other's canoes, go holding off across like that. And we'd get across to the other shore, and then we'd go up on shore on the island. And then the ricers, the adults and teenagers and adults would get out, get their boats ready, get ready, and launch off to start racing, their poles and their the knockers. And then grandmas, my grandma and her sisters, we would all get off on the island and we would stay there. And so our job was we would pick grapes and we would pick, I'm trying to think of everything that we picked. I think we picked acorns, we picked grapes, we picked, I can't remember what it was called, but we made string from it. And then at lunch, and then we would fix lunch, and the ricers would come back to the island, have lunch, and if their boats were full, they would put some of it into the big boat, and then they would go back out again. And then at the end of the afternoon, we would all go back to the island, load everybody up in the. Sometimes we had to make 2 trips because there wasn't enough room in the canoes. Luckily, on a good day, there wouldn't be enough room in the canoes because there'd be so much rice in there. So they'd have to run them back and then come back and get us on the shore and make a couple trips back and forth. And then so it'd be about 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 3 o'clock. And so by the time we would get back to Grandpa's house, we would have to take the rice and spread it out on big sheets or tarps, and the kids would have to clean out the stems. And there's rice worms. I don't know if anyone has said that yet. When you're ricing, there's these little rice worms. But anyway, so we would clean out the rice. So people at all ages had to participate. And when you got older, you were able to help parch or cook the rice over the fire. And so you're working around fire, so you had to be older to be able to stir that rice, or that one year the grandpas rigged up a parching barrel over the fire, and we'd have to turn the barrel. And so there's a process all along the way with the winnowing, the dancing on the rice, and then we would eat it. We'd be having rice for breakfast, rice for lunch. But it was beautiful. And in that story, you hear the generations and how the babies are involved, and the little ones get to pick big rice pieces of rice stalk out of the rice as we're drying it. And you have to keep turning it so it continues to dry. And so we lay it out and dry it first. And then we have to cook it. So everybody had a process or a role to play in ricing. And like I said, I grew up ricing at rice camp with my cousins who are, I don't know what you would call it in colonial terms, my second cousin or third cousin or however that goes. But in our community it's all family, right? It's all, your cousins are like your brothers and your sisters. So we all grew up close like that, ricing. So I just wanted to share that little intergenerational story of how we grew up ricing. And then as I got older and started working in schools, it became really hard for me to be able to get time off at the beginning of the school year. Still is, but I bought a canoe. So my journey this year, my granddaughters, is to get them in a canoe and out on the water, and again, gardening for them to understand relationship with food and earth and dirt and growing, and being able to, they pick some pickles already that they can't wait to put them in, make them turn her cucumbers into pickles, and watching the pumpkins start to kind of grow, and tomatoes. So, that whole intergenerational, on how do we pass this knowledge forward? It's not just telling the stories, but it's by hands-on and interacting. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Rochelle, and we can go to questions. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Lisa, thank you so much. I'm so happy that you mentioned the Mishomis book as well. I just bought it for my nephew for his first birthday. He's still little, he's one, but he's just beginning to pick books up and kind of talk at them. So I thought it was the perfect time for the Mishomis book. I'll share a link on the side for those interested in the Mishomis book, so you can buy it for your little ones as well. Thank you so much for sharing your journey. It's a really beautiful journey, and it just fills my heart to hear about the youth that'll be carrying on the ricing in the generations to come. So with that, I'm going to field a couple questions from the floor. I hope all of our panelists are ready. I'm going to start with William Morrison's question, which is, can you plant wild rice in a pond? And thank you everyone for sharing. He says, thank you, Bill Morrison. Dynamite Farms, would you like to answer?
I can give it a shot. It's my understanding, and I've actually heard some of these old stories too about Gete Anishinaabe, sort of our old time. I don't even know how to say that in English, but Gete Anishinaabe, and the story about replanting the Minomin, and I actually heard this from Lee Sprague, and basically it said that Gete Anishinaabe had brought back some of those seeds, that Minomin seeds, back to his mother, and said that he wanted to plant it. And his mother basically asked, like, well, where did you get it? Where did you find it? What did it look like? What did it smell like? What was the water like? You know, what was the bottom of the lake like? And he answered all those questions. And she said, well, we're going to have to find a place just like that. And then you can put those seeds in there. And so I don't know if your pond is actually going to have similar characteristics as the places where wild rice grows. But I think if you were going to be successful, you'd have to find some rice that actually grows in a pond somewhere else. And I'm not necessarily like a biologist, but I know wild rice needs really good water quality. It typically likes sort of a mucky bottom, and it typically likes some sort of a fresh water inflow and outflow, whether it's a lake or whether it's a river. It needs that fresh water. So if you have a stagnant pond and you don't have that inflow outflow, I don't know if those conditions would be right. But again, you know, turning back to those old stories, like Gete Anishinaabe, it's basically trying to find those matching up similar situations. So I hope that helps.
That's great, thank you. Any other panelists would like to add something? Okay, I just wanted to provide that opportunity. And from Charlie Brissett, we have, I've heard a couple of versions of the Anishinaabe migration story over the years and the significance of Minomin. And I've heard different perspectives on sharing our migration story with others, i.e. non-natives. What are the panelists' feelings on sharing our migration story with the general public? Frank, are you still here? Would you like to kick us off with that one?
Sure.
Thank you.
There we go. There are a lot of versions that have been shared already. This is always a, when I share our stories, I like to do it in person. I like to share those stories as much as possible in person because the stories are alive, and that as you share them, you hear there's an interaction between the listener and the teller that is an important part. Those things are not as good when they're in print or in a recorded version, because you only get that instance of the story. However, in this day and age, we have so many people so many of our people have been adrift from their traditions, that if there's not enough of us telling the stories in person to be able to actually be with everybody who has an interest in learning these things. So there are versions, and you know, I don't think I've ever heard a complete version of any of these stories that's been recorded or in print, but there's enough of it that we know about the general story, about the food that grows on the water, and this has been shared quite a bit. So I think you're going to have different opinions by different people. This is true all across Indian country about how much of which stories can be told and when they can be told. But one thing that I was taught is that the time to tell the rice stories is when the rice is on the water, when you're ready, when you're harvesting, that you share the information about these things during those times. And the same is true for the other foods that we have. And so you hear those stories about maple syrup, for instance, while you're out sugaring, and you hear the gardening stories when you're harvesting, and you share those stories. I think that it's important to sort of be aware of that full life cycle, and that's why I'm really impressed with what the folks here at Dynamite Farms are doing, because they're living those cycles and trying to make sure that their lives connect with those cycles. And I think that's something it's something we all should be doing, and some of us have been. I've been an organic gardener for 42 years, so I really appreciate Lisa saying she's gardening now with her grandkids. But I try to feel that connection with the earth, and so those stories are part of our connection. So I'm not sure if I've actually answered your question, but I know that there are different views on that, and I acknowledge those different views. And I don't think that there's any one view is necessarily the one that everybody subscribes to, is whether you should never tell a story or whether you should tell it as widely as possible to perpetuate them. And so I think we need to, in situations like this, we try to share those stories to make everybody aware that they exist, and to sort of let them become aware of their thirst for knowledge, and then try to find the place to get that, to drink from that knowledge wherever they can get it. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Any other panelists would like to add something? Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. We have just one more minute left, and there is another question on the side of the chat, and it actually is a great segue into our next panel about threats to the wild rice. So while we won't have time to discuss this right now, I would like to plant this seed for everybody, so we can think about it throughout the webinar, and we can circle back to it at the end when we have more time for questions and discussion. Tyler Tran has shared with us, the stories I've heard were all beautiful. Thank you very much. As many of you know, the University of Minnesota is cultivating wild rice against the will of many tribal partners. Would anyone be willing to comment on what's going on there, the history between tribes and the University of Minnesota, or what the ideal next steps would be with the University of Minnesota wild rice program from the tribal perspective? Thank you so much, Tyler, for posing that. Absolutely, it is one of the more shameful threats that we are facing, as it is a deliberate threat, especially by a university that is situated on Anishinaabe territory. So this is something I'm going to collect some more information on for us to circle back to. And I'd also like to add, University of Michigan had also been flagged in the Farm Bill 2 years ago regarding tactics and plans to genetically modify wild rice as well. So I'm going to gather a little more information on that, and then we'll circle back to that at the end of this webinar. So with that, we are right on time, 9 Central, 10 Eastern time. I want to say Chi-miigwech to our panelists from the first panel addressing the spiritual and cultural connection to wild rice. Please keep an eye on the chat, and we hope that you can continue to join us for the rest of the webinar, as many people are still continuing to join as well. So thank you so much to all the panelists. Thank you for joining us, and we'll move on now to panel number 2. So the second panel here, thank you. The second panel here is talking about the threats to our wild rice, which there are numerous different threats that we are facing. as the moderator of this panel, I'm actually going to take this opportunity to jump in a little bit. Unfortunately, we're having some technical difficulties north of the medicine line. Our panelist from Canada that will be joining us, so he's working very hard to get a connection, and we will definitely make time for him as soon as he is able to join. And we do have a few different threats to cover here. So this is threats to the survival of the Minomin, including mining, pipelines, fracking sand, GMOs, patenting, and climate change. I'm not sure many people are aware of this, but actually the sand for fracking is mined out of Michigan. On the lakes there, it is the most perfect sand, they say, to shoot into fracking wells. So in Michigan, they're being impacted by mining pipelines, but they're also having their earth removed for this terrible process. So I just wanted to bring that to the attention of people here, and just take a quick minute to talk about the proposed mines that are happening here in Minnesota. We have 2 mines that are being proposed. So I just want to start by saying the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is a core document used by International Indian Treaty Council and other Indigenous advocates to further protect our inherent rights as Indigenous peoples globally. I think it's important to reference this as a core document. It is the floor and not the ceiling, and I encourage all of you to take a look at that. A quick Google UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples PDF will bring that declaration up for you. So it's definitely something we want to keep in our pocket and as a tool in our belt as we fight have this multilateral fight to protect our wild rice. So the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in Article 25 affirms that Indigenous peoples have the right to our traditional medicines and to maintain our health practices, including the conservation of our vital medicinal plants, animals, and minerals. We also have the right to access without any discrimination all social and health services that we control in our own ways. Additionally, it outlines that Indigenous peoples have equal access to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. We are not able to do that as long as our lands and territories are under threat from environmental toxics. So we are seeing not only our traditional foods being re-engineered with GMOs as a threat, but rice being sprayed with harmful pesticides and other chemicals that are dumped into some of the lakes where our wild rice lives. We're also seeing the suspension by the US EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, of its enforcement of environmental laws, further contributing to future impacts. I think that's really important when we're talking about the mining. The current president is using this pandemic as an opportunity to weaken environmental regulations and push through his initiatives in regards to mining and pipelines, as we just saw with the Keystone XL pipeline, and continuing to further threaten the rights of Indigenous peoples in that way. So we have 2 dangerous mines on the table right now. The Polymet Mine, it is aiming to establish Minnesota's first copper nickel mine with an open pit mine and processing facility, including a tailings dam in the pristine Boundary Water Wilderness Canoe area in northern Minnesota. It's important to note that those waters, some run to the north and some run down to the south in the direction of most of our Ojibwe nations in northern Minnesota, but also impacting across the medicine line in Canada, their waters, their wild rice, and their environmental health as well. This land was previously federal parkland and was protected under the Obama administration. When Trump took office, who has personally close ties to some of the investors and largest shareholders, they sold the land off to Swiss mining giant Glencore and fast-tracked the mineral leases. Those are being challenged right now in court. My tribe, Fond du Lac, Band of Lake Superior Ojibwe, is one of the tribes that is leading the lawsuit, along with an organization called Water Legacy. So that's something to look into on how you can assist the efforts there. It's clear that these are being fast-tracked through an illegal process, and so far the courts have sided with us on a number of issues, although it's important to note that the mine continues to push through to the point where we're even seeing commercials saying Polymet is here advertising for jobs and such. And then just quickly before I pass it over, we have another threat that isn't as well known as the Polymet Mine, but is equally, if not more dangerous. This mine is being proposed in northern Minnesota, the same area, and the owner of this mine is Kennecott Exploration, and their parent company is Rio Tinto. They have already wreaked havoc in Michigan with the Eagle Mine, or Screaming Eagle Mine. They blew up a sacred site in Michigan. They removed women and elders that were there protecting the lands. I believe this was in about 2013. So they have a disgusting history, not only in the United States, but globally as well. This is a company that is directly connected to the genocide of Indigenous and other peoples in West Papua and Papua New Guinea, as well as in the Philippines. So I just wanted to share that with everyone. If you have any more questions about that, please feel free to email me. That is in the chat. So with that, thank you for allowing me a little bit of time here as we gather some more of our speakers. And I am very pleased and honored to welcome Chairman Mike Wiggins Jr. from the Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe, to join us today. He is a leader in his community in the Great Lakes region, fighting endlessly and tirelessly to keep our lands clean, our waters clean, to protect our wild rice, and to keep the lands protected for our future generations against mining, mountaintop removal, and other extractive industries. Thank you for joining us today, Chairman. You have the floor.
I'm an expert at talking with that mute button on. So, and then all my expertise falls away as soon as I take it off of mute. But it's an honor to be here with everybody today. I'll introduce myself. Makade Makwa and Indigenous Makwa Dode Mushkazibin and Ujba. My Anishinaabe name's Black Bear, and Bear Clan from Bad River. And you know, it's an honor to be invited to talk about wild rice, and to listen and hear some of the stories that were shared. You know, in Bad River, the Bad River Band of Lake Superior Chippewa, in Bad River here up on the shores of Lake Superior, and kind of as in the center of what is now commonly referred to as Wisconsin. I can hear McIsham from Glyphwood talking like that. But in Bad River here up on the shores of Lake Superior, we got some very, very old sacred wild rice beds. Wild rice beds that are somewhat unique in the sense that they are some of the, I think, last remaining, I would probably say last remaining, it might be the only significant wild rice beds on and within Lake Superior waters. And so it's a unique situation in that the heart of our wild rice beds that our people depend on are in the Kakagan Sloughs wetland estuary in Lake Superior waters, and subject to the tides and the ebb and flows of Chequamegon Bay, and ultimately the water levels of Lake Superior. So we end up seeing some interesting scenarios that are kind of manifesting as threats right now with the all-time high water levels that we're experiencing in the Great Lakes. And so in addition to that, as you know, I think many of us obviously understand, wild rice is inextricably linked to the cleanliness of water. And as water threats emerge all around us, there's a myriad of threats that start to manifest again as threats to wild rice. You know, a couple that I'll talk on, and I made a couple of notes. I'll mention mining. Bad River is in the center. I always think of Bad River and its proximity when you take that water view, its proximity to Moning-Wanakanig, Madeline Island, that old ancestral hub of the Anishinaabe Nation. Bad River is kind of in the center of the land, or of Anishinaabe lands, and of course our migration story comes through from the east. It takes us all the way to the Twin Ports, Duluth Superior, over on the western arm of Lake Superior, and it brings us back to Moning-Wanakanig. And I sent Rochelle a hand-drawn map of the Great Lakes. I see this awesome map right here. I'll show you, and I say this respectfully, I'll show you how I see the Great Lakes. I sent Rochelle a hand-drawn map of the Great Lakes, and I'll just say that Mushkegzeebe, Bad River, is always talked about as being home of the Thunderbirds. And so I got a couple of little hand-drawn maps I had sent Michelle that I'll pop up, the first one being the Great Lakes. But Bad River in the wild rice beds, as the crow flies, are only about 2 miles from Madeline Island shorelines. So when we go way back, those, as I heard that term, Gete Anishinaabe, those old people, those ancestors, those old ones that aren't with us anymore, long time ago, those ancients, you know, they spent millennia in and around Madeline Island, interacting with that Kakagan wetland wild rice bed that was only about a 2 mile paddle away. And there were 2 portages coming south off of Madeline Island. They would cross over a long 11-mile long peninsula that was only about 500 yards wide. That was called Long Island. We call it Long Island, Schwamigan Point. But they would portage over that. And there's a wild rice bed right there. It's referred to as sand cut within the Kakagan estuary. And then you portage again over about 500 yards, another small peninsula called Oak Point Peninsula. And you're in the main body of the Kakagan wild rice beds. And so I always think back on the migration story and how when they chose Moning-Wanakanig as that last stopping place in the migration story, Madeline Island, they were right there on top of the Kakagan wild rice beds. And so again, with those rice beds being a part of Lake Superior, we've always, and I've always carried a really, really deep sense of responsibility to try to protect that wild rice bed, to try to do what we can to send that into the future, you know, for the future generations that are still on the way. And you know, when we look through that lens of 7 generations, once you start looking through the lens of 7 generations, and of course we're the 7th generation from when those treaties signed, we meaning those of us that are walking this planet right now are pretty much in that class. I'm 51, and when we look at how that's come about, we were thought of back in late 1800s by those old leaders. All of us right now that are on this call, we're all thought of, and when they signed those treaty rights and set those usufructuary standards aside for us. Usufructuary standards meaning the ability to hunt, fish, gather, the ability to rice, all of that stuff was preserved for us. And so in 2020, we got to look way into the future. And of course, when we look at the different threats that are out there at wild rice, taking a 7-generation view, and then from that point, because you're already on a beautiful slippery slope of visioning, jumping into a 1,000-year window, you can start to see how imperative it is to hang on to what we have left. Because, you know, as far as water and hunting and fishing and gathering goes, what we have left right here in 2020 as Anishinaabe and with the treaty rights that have been reserved for us from our ancestors, what we have left is still enough. And that is the beauty of the Mama Aki and the water, is that it's still enough. But we're at that point. I can think of my elder Joe Rose Sr. talking about how, you know, we're at that crossroads, and this is the time of the quickening, and we have a choice to make. you know, and he talks about those prophecies of how we got to choose our path and that natural way, respecting natural laws. Well, all of that is a way of just giving a quick snapshot of the lenses that we apply to threats, and then how those old lenses and memories impact the policy and the decisions we make in real time to try to protect our water and our wild rice. And so mining was mentioned as one threat, and we definitely dealt with you know, the mining up here in the headwaters of the Bad River, right where the source of I will say Bawabakasin, that iron is. There's a metallic mineral body that they coveted, and that metallic mineral body, as a piece of remnant fire, is actually connected through fault lines and old volcanic fissures to the center of the earth. You know, 4.2 billion years ago, the Great Lakes were built by volcanic processes. You know, metallic mineral bodies that all these miners covet, that's just trapped remnant fire of the lava channels that used to be alive and in action around the Great Lakes. As that lava got cooled and beat back down deep into the earth, to the center of the earth, thousands of miles from our feet, that at the surface, that lava got cooled, and all the things that are at the center of the earth, iron, gold, nickel, silver, all those things that are in that center of the earth in molten form, producing that electromagnetic charge, they're all contained in those metallic mineral bodies that are trapped and cooled at the surface. To help some of our young people understand that, I always reference a forge when they're pounding on that molten orange thing that's going to be a sword or Excalibur, you know, and they take it and they put it in the water and cool it very quickly, and it cools and hardens. That's what we have. But those old volcanic fissures and fault lines are conducting as groundwater conductors. They are conducting cold, deep, clean earth and water. And from deep within the earth, water from pressure and all of the heat that's inside Nimamaaki, you know, that steam pressure pushing out, pushes deep earth and water upwards towards the surface of this planet. Water does what water does. It jumps into path of least resistance, which is the volcanic pathways. And ultimately, it comes bubbling up through these metallic mineral bodies on a regional planetary scale that is unbelievable. Well, our metallic mineral body that sits above the Bad River is conducting trillions upon trillions of clean, cold gallons of water that rehydrate the surface waters, that drive the recharge energy within our groundwater aquifers. And all of that stuff is coming up cold and clean and getting conducted by our highlands and our reservation lands into Lake Superior. So that when we think of the mining companies, they come in, they want to claim expertise and make it a little bit of a smoke and mirrors game, where people get confused as to how come there's always so much water wherever they want to mine metallic mineral bodies. Well, the reason being is those metallic mineral bodies are there for a reason, and the connectivity to the center of the earth is real, and the groundwater that they are conducting from the earth is part of that 1-2 punch of, I always refer to it, 1-2 punch of love from the Creator. You got groundwater just springing up from the earth through these old volcanic pathways, through those metallic mineral bodies, surfacing, keeping your systems cold, oxygenated, clean, recharging both surface water, below water, and those metallic mineral bodies carry an electromagnetic charge that, you know, call in the thunderstorms. And so, you know, the Keweenaw Tip is a classic example of that, and so are the Great Lakes in general. You know, there's some readings I did when I was doing my research to battle a mine, and I came across an old line in some of the writings that I was reading, and it just said simply that the early explorers remarked how some of the old Ojibwe that they encountered would always mention how proud they were to live in a place that's seen more than its fair share of storms. And that was a reference to Gimwan, that rain, that cleansing water from above. So that 1-2 punch love, we live in a place, this Great Lakes area, that has unbelievable groundwater capacity coming up from deep within the earth, connected to the center of the earth. And we live in a place that actually calls in those thunderstorms, and we get that water from the sky. When you apply climate change lenses that talk about drought, that's that 1-2 punch of love. That's that 1-2 punch insurance policy that we live in a place that will help us go through tough times. And so getting back to wild rice, when you talk about climate change and drought, or maybe even volcanic activity that could result in little epic mini ice ages, real quickly as a side note, at 8 pounds per gallon with the top of the world and the bottom of the world melting, at 8 pounds per gallon, when the top and bottom of the world melt and redistribute on this fragile thing called the tectonic plate system that's been in an epically peaceful kind of slumber, we may see volcanic activity. Volcanic activity that this planet hasn't seen in a long time. So long that we're in an epic right now where human beings are walking around Washington thinking they are in charge of this planet and its natural laws and processes. But as if we look at drought, or we look at mini ice ages, climate change could send us into a scenario where that window of life gets really small. And I always tell our kids, you know, that window of life got so small one time that that Tyrannosaurus Rex couldn't get through that window, and that megaflora and fauna couldn't get through that window. And but you know what did? Wild rice went through that window. Wild rice, with its 99-year dormancy that was documented as scientifically in Minnesota. You know, they people living on this little inland lake hadn't seen wild rice in 100 years, and they wake up one summer morning after floating leaf stage, and boom, the wild rice is all blown up inside their lake growing. They documented a 99-year dormancy. When you think of the power of that seed that's in that bog, that's how you go through epochs of time when the window of life is small and there's very, very hard times. That seed will sleep and return to help the people. You know, Lake Superior sturgeon went through that window when Tyrannosaurus Rex couldn't. A prehistoric fish that is still swimming in the black lava rock riverbeds up in the upper watershed of the Bad River. And so by following the wild rice, and obviously wild rice as a staple in our diet before the winter months that, you know, used to have the possibility of starvation attached to it. But following our wild rice, following our sturgeon, following our black lava rock upper watershed, and our water pathways that were here from the beginning, when things get really tough, that's how Anishinaabe is going to go through. And of course, I always think of our prophecies that talk about rainbow people. The rainbow people will emerge, those people that get back to the land and try to live within the rules of natural law, taking care of your water and things like that. That'll be all people. But as Ojibwe, as Anishinaabe, you know, we definitely take a long view, and we wanna go through that. So the threat of mining and mountaintop removal in our watershed in Bad River was an existential threat. It was a threat to our groundwater aquifer recharge. It was a threat to our surface waters. The sulfuric acid producing, sulfide minerals, which produce hydrochloric acid when exposed to air and water, when they dig up rocks that were never meant to see the light of day, they're into old ancient things that were not meant to be in daylight and conducive to life. And they create, unfortunately, lasting impacts that will go on for millennia. When I think of those metallic mineral bodies conducting groundwater, the mining that has been done around Lake Superior already has been atrocious, and I would say apocalyptic in a way, because it hasn't stopped yet, and as Rochelle mentioned. But the other thing that comes with that sulfuric acid hit into your waterways is that mining releases sulfate pollution, and that's a whole other issue for wild rice, because sulfate pollution at parts higher than 30 30 parts per million in water has shown and been studied to show that it decimates wild rice beds. And so many of you may know that in Minnesota, that's one thing that the legislators and the mining companies have attacked, is that standard of 30 parts per million in sulfate. In order to mine some of these metallic mineral bodies, they have to raise that standard for their mines to be legal right now. And so they're attacking that. And you know, I know Honor the Earth and Winona and many others are pushing back against those types of attempts to keep that sulfate pollution standard there, because as that sulfate pollution rises, wild rice is just decimated. And so, you know, those were two of the major threats: the sulfuric acid and the sulfate unload. The mercury and all of that, there's so much to talk about when you talk about mining, but all of that, when you're in the hydrological connectivity, when your wild rice beds are directly connected by water, and it is the same water body at the top of the watershed to the bottom down by Lake Superior, that stuff gets to be existential, not to mention that its toxicity that is being unleashed on the people's drinking water, stuff like that. So mining was a huge threat. What we're also dealing with as kind of in the center of a lot of threats and activity here in Bad River is we're dealing with the Enbridge Line 5 threat. Right through the middle of our reservation, Line 5 runs east to west, and where it crosses underneath the Bad River right now, it's about 8 miles as a crow flies from Lake Superior. The mouth of the Bad River, where the Bad River flows north into Lake Superior, is just an unbelievable place. It's so beautiful. I mentioned Long Island as an 11-mile long peninsula. On the lake shore, on the Lake Superior, the north side of Long Island, that peninsula, it's just a white sand beach. I mean, it's, if you can imagine, an 11-mile long, beautiful white sand beach with Lake Superior shoreline, you know, waves crashing on it. But the mouth is all of that. And that's only you know, 8 miles as a crow flies from the Enbridge line. Well, where the Enbridge line crosses the Bad River, there's an oxbow forming, and the river's doubling back on itself. Where it doubles back, it's pounding directly at a perpendicular angle into the Enbridge pipeline. So much so that it's blasting away the riverbank and all of that. And it's only about 19 feet from the Enbridge Line 5 pipe. What they've proposed, meaning the oil transmission company, is they proposed a 1.5 mile directional boring, starting 3/4 of a mile from the Bad River on one side and ending 3/4 of a mile on the other. They want to essentially industrialize the river bottoms and the river corridor, and do a 1.5 mile directional bore pipe, similar in a microcosm to or in a micro sense to the proposed tunnel underneath the Mackinac Bridge. They've never done nothing like that before. It would be the first in the nation. And what I've learned from Enbridge is the same as GTAC, is they are trying to manifest reality, and in doing so, they're utilizing MSU, and MSU was an old term that we were trained not to do in law enforcement when I went to law enforcement school. You don't use MSU, and MSU stood for make shit up. Enbridge is trying to manifest reality by making shit up, and they turn in these plans for things like a 1.5 mile directional boring that look like a kindergarten kid scratched it out. In fact, when you see my hand-drawn maps, they'll be likened to what you get from Enbridge engineers as they talk about their plans for the future and for the future of your waterways. So we've engaged in litigation under the power of in an old lease that expired. They had 2 leases to operate. One covered trust lands. The other one covered some kind of airship, privately held trust lands. Well, through reacquisition of private property and some of our trust parcels that were fragmented on that second lease that was more in the private realm, we successfully became the primary property owner. So that second lease is driven by the Bad River tribe. Well, that expired in 2017, and our tribe rejected the renewal. Within the business agreement with Enbridge, if that lease was not renewed, it called for the decommissioning and removal of Line 5 from our reservation boundaries. And so there's the TIF. There's the other lease that's on some trust lands with Bad River. That lease was signed and is in effect until I think 2043. So we have two leases within Bad River that are contradicting each other, but our legal position is decommission and remove because we have the legal right to reject the renewal of that one lease agreement that I mentioned. Enbridge has responded. Well, they it's kind of like a lot of squirming, watching the company do a lot of squirming and blustering. They responded by claiming they were just going to eminent domain our waterways, which I wouldn't say we laughed at, but at the same time, as a sovereign nation, it's just a reminder from a sovereign nation to a privately owned for-profit company. Remember who you are. You're talking to a sovereign, and so that went away. And they're currently working very hard to reroute. They call it a segment line reroute outside and around the reservation. And so, on one hand, that's a positive. They're leaving our reservation boundaries, and they're going to reroute to the south. And their reroute would still be within the watershed as a counter to the positive. It's the negative side. The downside is that they'd still be within the watershed, and where their pipe ultimately would cross Bad River would be about 23 miles rather than the 8 miles from the lake. So we're fighting against that reroute, and we're going to battle them on any reroute or operations within the watershed. Because here in Bad River, we claim that watershed as part of our nest. There's an old story that says you can sit in the Kakagan sloughs, look across to the west, and you can see across Chequamegon Bay, and you can see the high hills of Bayfield County. You can look 25 miles to the south and see the Pinocchio Mountains, the upper watershed, 25 miles down there. And you can look to the east and see the high hills of Iron County and what started the snow belt. But that story says that in that moment you're floating that canoe out there in the sloughs, out in the wild rice, you see all those high hills around you. You got to understand that the water coming off those high places is flowing right at you in that moment. And in that moment, you might actually feel like you're in the bottom of a bowl, but it's not a bowl. It's a nest, and that's Bad River's always been home of the Thunderbirds. That's how that story goes. And so, as far as the watershed goes, we're claiming all of that, and we're going to be in motion to battle Enbridge on their Line 5 reroute. So we don't want them in the res, and we don't want them in our watershed. And to be honest, there's nowhere for them to go. And as many of you know, in Michigan, they need to decommission and remove Line 5. And it's 2020 with water rising in everybody's consciousness as something to protect. It's time to make these for-profit, privately owned oil companies follow suit. So mining and Enbridge Line 5 are huge threats. And I mentioned the high water levels in the sloughs. The other things that we deal with are in the floating leaf stage. As that rice is coming up, there's that point in June where it bends and it floats on the water. With all the big boats now, I think of those big 250, 300 horsepower boats that I see, those big bass boats. When they rip through the channels out in the Kakagan sloughs where the wild rice beds are, they're throwing massive wave wakes. And those wakes during that floating leaf stage, as that big wave comes through and pulls that blade, it looks like a blade of grass at that point, but it pulls that wild rice up into the air and oftentimes uproots it uproots it from the bottom of the bog. And so we're watching a couple of things happen with all of the increasingly bigger boat traffic and pressure on those waterways. We're watching during floating leaf stage, our rice get decimated, and then the channels are getting bigger and bigger, and so we're pushing back policy and working with the town of Sanborn, the local township, to create ordinances and wake no wake zones and stuff like that that we can enforce. We don't have much help from the state DNR, and that gets to another threat realm that I think is important to remember, and that's the attitudes of state governments, the attitudes of our local municipalities, and ultimately the attitudes of people around us. A lot of times our wild rice beds in those lakes, inland lake communities, are looked at as kind of pesky, weedy areas that need to be destroyed and opened up so they can swim off their pontoon and things like that. And so the attitudes a lot of times where wild rice beds are, when you have encroaching lakefront water homes and stuff, is to try to remove that kind of thing. I always think of the correlation between, you know, my elders talk about the correlation between wilderness, Maingan the wolf, and of course Anishinaabe. In many ways, you know, there's a metaphor transfer to wild rice, clean water, nature, and Anishinaabe. Unfortunately, a lot of times that's the first thing that folks want to get rid of is wilderness and some of these beautiful natural wild rice areas to make room for what they want to do as far as recreation goes. The state DNR, again, with as they often refer to, with no stakeholder, quote unquote, stakeholder pressure, they don't put a high value on us trying to protect and enforce some of our ways to protect wild rice beds. So that's an ongoing issue there. And the other thing that's really interesting and has been emerging too as a threat that we're going to respond to is during the mining battle, Bad River got blown up for its wastewater and septic capacity or incapacity. We had old aging infrastructure in our wastewater treatment area, and during big storms we would get overloaded and would cause releases of sewage. And we've probably put 7 million since 2012 into our wastewater treatment realms. But in real time, we were getting attacked by the Wisconsin legislators as being bad actors. They want to protect water, but look what they're doing with sewage. And even though we were in the midst of working with the EPA and everybody else on trying to fix those things, I remember Tom Tiffany, who is, we call him Toxic Tommy. He's a mining shill and now a congressman. He's up for election in November. But I remember him saying that the Bad River Tribe is the biggest polluter in the state of Wisconsin. And so, for reference, we do on a daily basis, we do about 73,000 gallons of treated water discharge out of our septic realm. And as a comparison, the small town of Ashland, Wisconsin, over on our western boundary, we do 73,000 gallons a day. They do 1 million gallons a day. At that time, during the mining battle back in 2012, when we were getting attacked for our wastewater treatment stuff, I felt like I was talking in a vacuum or in space. No one could hear me. I would say, you know, we're trying to fix our issues, but what we represent is essentially minutia compared to even the local township at 1 million gallons per day. Well, since then, up here in this part of the Chequamegon Bay and Apostle Island area, there's been a really heady water consciousness that has risen. We've fended off hog CAFO farms. We've done a lot of things. Well, one of the things that is now in the ether here, and I love it, is that people understand that Ashland has even worse infrastructure problems. I shouldn't say I love it. I'm actually going to try to work to remedy it. But I love the fact that people now understand the true context of what's going on around here. Ashland, every thunderstorm and big rain rain event we have, Ashland is doing around 9 million gallons of untreated sewage into Chequamegon Bay every storm event. And so when with the reality of how that outdated infrastructure is impacting Lake Superior right here in Chequamegon Bay, there's a lot of work to be done. What's really sad, and why I mentioned the septic issue, I'll talk about how that relates to wild rice in a moment, but why I mention that is you can pick any municipality, put your finger on any town on any map in the Midwest area or Great Lakes region, and I will tell you, and I would bet you $1 million that town has unbelievably outdated, broken, insufficient wastewater treatment capacity and systems. So every rain event, all of these towns are unleashing raw sewage into the local waterways and systems around them. So Ashland has a huge issue. When they do 9 to 10 million gallons of raw sewage in Chequamegon Bay every storm, that nutrient loads the bay. All of our beach monitoring shows that after high rain events, there's higher E. coli levels and things like that. To link that back to wild rice, and why I mentioned this as an issue, is that when wild rice is growing out of the bog and it's still underwater, that nutrient loading can steal the oxygen from the water. Low oxygen levels, when that rice is still underneath the surface, low oxygen levels can kill that wild rice. And so as we've struggled with our wild rice beds in Lake Superior, Chequamegon Bay, and we got Ashland as a town doing 9 to 10 million gallons of raw sewage every time it rains hard, we're working with the Burke Freshwater Research Center out of Northland College over in Ashland. We're going to get after some of these nutrient loading and oxygenation levels and correlate them back, studying with how our wild rice is responding to that. So when I look back on the tail of the tape, even over the last decade, there definitely could be some linkage between that nutrient loading and low crop yield, in terms of what surfaced and grew. So it's when we talk about threats, Rochelle mentioned the GMO factor and all of that, the chemicals and everything else. There's just such a host of things that rise up to just make it a very difficult pathway. Wild rice is just like Anishinaabe in our ways. It's a huge challenge to keep on plugging away with vitality and integrity. The way the system is designed around us, modern society is designed to tamp that down, every time we turn around. And so, I wanted to say, that much about some of those threats that are out there. And I know there's another panel that will talk about some of the future scenarios of working to protect things. But, we're looking at a lot of different angles too, to try to protect, preserve. We're looking at seed banking, and even cultivating potential lakes that we knew had wild rice in the past that don't have it anymore. With climate change and things like that, I've even heard our TIPO officer talk about taking our genetic blend of the Kakagan area and working with Canadian tribes to maybe send rice further north for the future, and so it's going to be interesting to see how all of that plays out. So I guess, Rochelle, I don't know if you could load up the picture of the Great Lakes. This is how I see the world, the Great Lakes and all these metallic mineral bodies connected to the center of the earth, and Bad River being home of the Thunderbirds.
Excuse me, Chairman. I'm so sorry. I don't have it in my email.
Well, I texted it to you. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, and I only have text there. I don't have any images or anything. Sorry, I'm not holding them hostage. Is there any way for you to share your screen?
Well, I can email it to you, and
okay, that sounds good.
Show it later, but yeah. So those were some of the threats that I wanted to cover, and some of the things that I want to mention. So I don't know if there's any questions.
Thank you so much. We do have a question or two, but just really quickly, I'm going to just inform the participants that might not be familiar what Enbridge is. So Enbridge line 5 is threatening Michigan and Wisconsin, and line 3 has been a threat to Minnesota since 1956, and now the line 3 extension is a current threat that we're facing. Instead of just emptying and abandoning an old eroded line, they're choosing to reroute and build another pipeline. So those are current threats that we're facing. And Enbridge, those lines originate in Alberta, and they are carrying dirty tar sands oil. So this is a cross-border issue. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention, and so you can look more into it and assist with our advocacy as we continue to fight these horrendous pipelines threatening our beautiful bodies of water. So I see this coming through. I'm going to get this picture up, and in the meantime, I'm going to pose this question. What do you think the current extreme warming of the Great Lakes is about, and does it negatively affect the growth of Minomin?
Well, the warming of the Great Lakes is definitely due to the increasing temperatures and climate change. One of the things that I reference back is when we destroy these metallic mineral bodies, where there's a couple of words, obfuscation and obstructing, we're creating and we're destroying the conductivity, the ability of these places to bring cold, clean water from the earth and into regional systems. That cold, clean water is meant to get into Lake Superior quick. And so when you're mining all around and you're destroying these metallic mineral bodies, and I would just encourage you to think about those metallic mineral bodies truly as conductors of water, because that's what they do. When we destroy those, the Great Lakes' ability to recharge in a cold, clean fashion is impacted. I remember telling EPA legislators, oh, there's my picture of the Great Lakes. Just sharing respectfully how I see and what was shown to me. But when they say Bad River is home of the Thunderbirds, you know, the Great Lakes region, I've heard all those metallic mineral bodies referred to by different people as the Ring of Fire around Lake Superior. But when we destroy that, Lake Superior, and of course I have the Lake Superior and Georgian Bay represent that lead Thunderbird. Lake Michigan, with that area that comes up towards Green Bay to the west as that dorsal, and Lake Huron as the tail. And then just for the sake of filling it out, you got Erie and Ontario below. I got that lead Thunderbird carrying food for its babies. As an old Indian who experiences the world multidimensionally, everything I need to know about this place that the Anishinaabe and others call home is encapsulated right there. It's all about love and life and growing. And if all birds are messengers, you know, they always say the most sacred of all, sent from the Creator himself, is Miigwech, the eagle. And I always think of Jeff Foxworthy, the comedian. There's your sign, you know. But that Ring of Fire, Lake Superior has a 250-year recharge, meaning it takes 250 years for Lake Superior to change its bathwater. Down below, as an example, Lake Erie is on a 2.5-year recharge. It only takes 2.5 years for Lake Erie to change its bathwater, so to speak. Now, what's really interesting to note is Lake Erie is blowing up with blue algae, toxic algae, and with the added advantage, when you think of the planet and these systems, with the advantage of a lake that cleans its bathwater every 2.5 years, they still can't get rid of that algae. They still cannot rehab that lake, and they struggle with that. In fact, some of the recent articles I read were kind of doom and gloom, predicting that they think they're going to lose that lake to toxic algae. Well, my point is that 250-year, you got a 250-year recharge. When Lake Superior goes, I guess you'd say, either too warm or too toxic, if you can't recharge a lake that changes its water fresh for you every 2.5 years, I don't know how we're supposed to rehab a lake that changes its water every 250 years. Now here's the added dimension, and I get back to the metallic mineral bodies. When we're destroying groundwater pumps on a planetary scale all around these places through mining, it ain't a 250-year recharge anymore. If that 250-year recharge was established in the 40s or 50s through scientific formulas, the destruction from mining has never stopped. And when you destroy the ability of that groundwater to get into Lake Superior, back into the lake, you're creating scenarios where the lake doesn't recharge even as quickly. So I'll bet you any money the recharge is more 300 to 350. Where does that stop? I don't know. We get into the bigger picture of you know, old school thinking like Make America Great Again, which still views nature as an infinite, you know, infinite resource that's just there to plunder. Well, the reality is scientifically, we know that we're having an impact and that these resources aren't infinite when you're talking the fact that there's 7 billion of human beings walking around on the surface now. So it's really important to keep these places protected, to keep that cold water flowing. As far as the warming water and its effect on wild rice, I really have to punt on that. I don't know what the correlation there. I do know that some of the exotic invasives and again, some of the algae blooms are synonymous with warming water. And those algae blooms obviously work to choke out native plants and fragile plants like wild rice. So it's one of those things that we're going to have to push back against. And on a macro view, we need to protect our mineral bodies, protect water, and on a micro view, we need to get in there and fight and find ways to reduce those algae blooms and the nutrient loading and things like that. So, and then I don't know, Rochelle, if you got the western arm of Lake Superior. I showed Great Lakes with that. I call it that lead thunderbird, but there's that little thunderbird that I also sent. Oh, you're on mute. Maybe I didn't send it. Who knows? But oh, so one other thing about this map, if you could pop that one more time, I always get a kick out of this.
Sure, no problem. And sorry, that is the only one I have. So I'll...
Okay, I sent the other one too, but I probably didn't. Oh, I see. If you pop the Great Lakes back up, the other thing about this little hand-drawn map or way of seeing is that if you just, like my grandma said, use your imagination, Mike. You know, if you just come with me on this notion that I'm showing you an eagle with a fish, as you know, as my map of the Great Lakes. What's kind of cool is if we take our eagle and on the backside of the Keweenaw tip there, I drew that little eagle head in there. But if you put your dot where you think anatomically the heart of that lead thunderbird would be, if you put your dot where you think the heart is, you'd be putting your dot right in the deepest point in Lake Superior. And what's kind of cool is the deepest point in Lake Superior is the lowest point on Turtle Island. It's the lowest place on a North American continent. And to me, that's not random. Everything happens for a reason. The lowest point on Turtle Island is the closest place to the center of the earth. Center of the earth where our drum beats go and bounce out to Ishpeming, you know, that highest place up there. That's how close to love this place is connected to how the Creator wanted us to be. And so a lot of times, you know, I'll have people say, well, you know, the center of the earth, like how could that be important, you know? And I said, well, it throws out an electromagnetic charge that keeps the poles balanced. I said, we talk about pole shifts and things get kind of gloomy for life. It sends out an electromagnetic charge that on a planetary scale keeps meteors off our back. And, you know, and so the center of the earth is conducting, it's working. And I think our old people understood that as they connected electromagnetic charge and energy to things like thunderbirds and all of that, but that's a whole nother discussion, and one I'd love to have, just to get lost in the wonder of it all. But anyway, in the heart of our lead thunderbird, the Great Lakes there, is the deepest point in Lake Superior, and you guys can reference that back with real maps later. It's just a way of seeing, and at the end of the day, I share it respectfully because it was shown to me as part of a way to talk about metallic mineral bodies and the need to protect our places from mining. And if at the end of the day you don't see it, I respect that too.
Thank you so much, Chairman. Really such an extensive overview of what's going on here, and considering, you know, we all make located really is the heart of it. And some people don't know, but Lake Superior is one of the deepest freshwater lakes in the world. So when we see these threats to our water, it's even more shocking that anyone would attempt to pollute this beautiful body of water that of course we hold sacred, but this is not just a native thing. This is everybody's wonderful water to enjoy, to protect. And sometimes it can be very shocking to all of us that people don't share this need to ensure that our lake stays fresh and clean for our future generations. I also just wanted to comment on just quickly what you said about, we brought up mercury a bit. I just want to let our participants know that there is a United Nations convention called the Minamata Convention on Mercury, and the United States was the very first signatory to the very first country to ratify this convention. So they have very serious obligations under international law regarding mercury. And I just want to point out that the indigenous peoples of the Great Lakes region are disproportionately impacted by mercury for the reasons that Chairman Wiggins shared around mining and sulfides. The sulfides turn to methyl mercury in our fish, people living traditional sustenance lifestyles, especially in rural regions in northern Minnesota, such as Grand Portage, are just continuing to live their traditional ways and don't have a lot of communications coming to them from the EPA or other places that warn them of the dangers of mercury in fish. What the result is we saw babies being born in northern Minnesota that were already pre-polluted with high levels of mercury in their systems. So that's just something I wanted to tag for our viewers here. If you want more information on the Minamata Convention or how Indigenous peoples have engaged with this process so far, I'm very happy to share that. And I also just do want to make a call out for Indigenous peoples impacted by mercury to continue to engage, or to begin to engage with this important international mechanism. Indigenous peoples have a voice at the United Nations, not as subsidiaries of the governments that colonized us, but as Indigenous peoples under the UN Declaration. IITC is very happy to provide information and resources and training if necessary to understand how to access this convention and how you and your tribe can utilize this convention to further protect our land's resources and see that our treaty rights are upheld. So I just wanted to say that. I hate to end this important panel on threats, and I really want to extend my sincere gratitude and appreciation once again to Chairman Wiggins, who really has taken a lot of time with us today to give us an extensive overview to understand what's happening here, and really touched on almost all of the threats, the indicators that we are facing. So please feel free to continue in the chat. And with that, one final thing, we did have 2 other panelists for this. I don't want to move on without acknowledging Cheyenne St. John and Ron Mandamin that were going to be joining us today that are having some technical difficulties. We will try to patch them in if at all possible, but I did want to inform people that may have joined us today to hear from one of them, and we'll be sure to still share the information that they were going to provide on, in particular, impacts of climate change as a threat to our wild rice, as well as environmental toxics, such as nuclear dump sites that are threatening the Prairie River Band of Ojibwe in Lower Sioux right now. So with that, I'm going to say Chi-miigwech to all of our panelists so far. We hope you can continue to enjoy, to stay with and enjoy the rest of the webinar. And I would like to graciously pass the floor over. Thank you, Chairman.
Can I say one last thing?
Yes, please do.
I just want to say, I love you, Frank. Consider him my elder right there. He's not on the call or not on the video. Yeah, I just want to say,
there he is.
Frank, send love.
Thank you. I'm glad you could be here today.
Miigwech.
And all of us do so much, Frank. Thank you. So we are going to switch gears a little bit. We've talked about traditional methods. We talked about our cultural ties. We talked about threats to the wild rice. And so now it's important that we move on to solutions, and we end this in a good way, in an action-oriented way, so that we know how all of us as individuals can continue to work to protect our Minomin. So panel 3 is titled Solutions in Our Hands from the Local, Tribal, State, National, and International Level. Our first presenter is June Lorenzo, Laguna Pueblo, who assists IITC as legal counsel in international mechanisms. Thank you so much for joining us, June, and I will let you introduce yourself. The floor is yours.
Figure out. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, Goatsi Hopa. I'm from Laguna Pueblo. I'm also, Dene on my mother's side. I've mostly grown up at Laguna, so I'm not sure how I got on this webinar surrounded by Ojibwe people, but I'm very humbled, and so thank you for the invitation to participate. I'm learning so much by listening. So hearing about wild rice, and so of course I'm an attorney here right now. I'm a judge for one of the pueblos. I have a private practice, and I do I have in state and tribal courts. Excuse me, and then of course the work that I do with IITC on international human rights advocacy. I have worked on both the declarations in the UN and the Organization of American States, which less people know about, but it's very relevant to all of the rights that we're talking about today. And I guess I'll start off my remarks with talking about the work I do in my community in advocacy, which has to do with uranium mining. For those of you who know, this part of New Mexico heavily impacted by uranium mining, and so I work with other community members on uranium legacy issues. And one of the largest impacts on our community, so I'm speaking of Laguna Pueblo, we have the largest open pit uranium mine in our community. In particular, if you know Laguna Pueblo, it has 6 villages. And just a second. Yes, hello? Hello? So I'm not sure if people can hear me. I just got a call from Rochelle. Anyway, I will keep going. Can someone just show me a thumbs up that you can actually hear me? Because I got a call from Rochelle.
I can hear you.
Okay. I just got, where I am, I have no cell phone reception. So if the cell phone rings, it rings and that's all. So sorry about that. With the groups I work with, one of the largest impacts on our communities, including Laguna Pueblo, Acoma Pueblo, which is next to us, and Navajo. And then not only us, but the pueblos that are located near Los Alamos Laboratories, our water, of course, in this desert area is very sacred, and we have much less than you all do. We think you have a wealth of water. So years of uranium mining and dewatering really drained a lot of wells and underground water. And so Laguna and Yakima have been involved in a lawsuit for water rights involving Kerr-McGee, one of the uranium companies, for decades. And so I guess, everything that the people in your area can do to avoid having to deal with it after the fact, like we have, would be really an important lesson. And I want to say that one of our struggles, it's very important, a lesson learned, is that in looking at or arguing with the EPA over levels of contamination and standards and so on, one of the things we don't have is background data. And so the more that you can do to establish your background data today and that you have a record of it is really important, because we've been arguing with the mining companies. The mining companies included Anaconda, then it was bought out by Atlantic Richfield, and today is owned by British Petroleum, Kerr-McGee, and the company that owned the mining mills in Grants, and where the uranium was taken, is now a subsidiary of Rio Tinto. So it is all connected in that way. So I just want to observe that, and I think with this limited time, I just want to focus on two areas and be respectful of the time that I have. I want to talk about like two general areas of sort of advocacy internationally. And one thing I really want to stress, and I thought about it as I was listening to the speakers this morning, is, my goodness, this the wealth of indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, that is like gold to us. And there are many entities and persons, universities and so on in the world that really want access to this, because how else would we have kept our territories all over the world in such great shape, and to have relationship with where we live. So I think that's really something that it needs to be protected. We didn't think we needed to, but we live in an age where entities, universities, academics, they want to publish on this stuff. They want to say they quote unquote discovered. For me, it's like the new area of doctrine of discovery, where people want to say that, they claimed it, it's theirs, they can get a patent on something. And so I think that's one of the new areas that we really have to pay more attention to. I know many of us come from teachings that these things on how to treat the world and how to have relationship with our surroundings are not something to be stingy with, so to speak, but I think we're in a time now where we have to be just careful and good stewards of not only the land, but the knowledge that's so connected to the land. So I chatted with Rochelle a little bit about, and I'll let her, because she's the expert, you all are the experts on wild rice, but I wanted to speak of the general area first of, let me just speak about sort of protections within the international system. In addition to the articles of the UN Declaration that Rochelle mentioned, Articles 11 and 12 really go to cultural rights, and they can be tied to so many things that we do, our relationship with our land, our knowledge, and so on. So if you read Articles 11 and 12, that's so critical. I want to tell you a little bit about what we did with regard years ago to Mount Taylor. Mount Taylor, if you know New Mexico, is a very sacred mountain to many of us. And 5 tribes got together when there was a threat of renewed mining, because mining shut down after 30 years and it wasn't cleaned up. So there was a renewed interest in mining. And so 5 tribes, Laguna, Yakima, Hopi, Zuni, Navajo, got together and worked for years to get protection for the mountain. And so we took that to the international level, tying cultural rights to environmental rights. and using both New Mexico and federal laws. And I want to note specifically, and I can provide some slides and resources later, but there's something I really want to note, because sometimes people think, oh, it's international, you know, you never see results, and it's really lofty, and it's really, you know, so people say, you know, what about hard law and so on. Well, for people like, you know, the Treaty Council who've been at this for decades, and I didn't have gray hair when I started this either, but I mean, you begin to see it's so important to build up this area of knowledge, to build it up over the years. And it's embarrassing, but the United States has signed only a handful of international treaties, but one of the treaties they've signed is the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. And every so many years, they have to report their compliance to the Human Rights Committee. When Treaty Council always submits what's called the shadow report. So basically the United States submits a report and says, oh, we're doing wonderful. We're observing all these treaty rights, and here's all the wonderful things we've done. Treaty Council and a host of other organizations write back and say, actually not, here are all the violations. Here are all the ways that they need to improve in complying with the treaty. And so one of the areas that we addressed was tied to uranium mining. And when the committee, and so what happens is the United States gets questions, they provide a report, then civil society gets to respond. Then the Human Rights Committee issues basically a final report. And I thought about when you were talking about the threats, they're from the last, what's called periodic, it's a report. The US just submitted their fourth one. This process ended, this reporting process, the last report was in 2014. Just want to read really quickly 2 paragraphs. And this is the Human Rights Committee in their report saying, the committee is concerned about the insufficient measures taken to protect the sacred areas of Indigenous peoples against desecration, contamination, and destruction as a result of urbanization, extractive industries, industrial development, tourism, and toxic contamination. It is also concerned that the restriction of access of Indigenous peoples to sacred areas that are essential for the preservation of their religious, cultural, and spiritual practices, and the insufficiency of consultation with Indigenous peoples on matters of interest to their communities. And then what it tells the state party to do is said, the state party should adopt measures to effectively protect sacred areas of Indigenous peoples against desecration, contamination, and destruction, and ensure that consultations are held with the Indigenous communities that might be adversely affected by the state's development projects and exploitation of natural resources, with a view to obtaining their free, prior, and informed consent for proposed project activities. So a couple of things I want to point out. One is that it doesn't have to be only lands that are currently within the tribal government's control. So there are, as you know, lots of lands, sacred areas that we have that are no longer within tribally controlled areas. But the UN Declaration clearly provides that we should have access to sacred areas even outside of our current territories, because we know they originally were our territories. So the other thing about it is sometimes we think it's only the federal government. And during that process, I recall that there was a comment made that because of the way the US government is organized, this should be, these recommendations should be employed and implemented at all levels. So state, federal, county. So we shouldn't be hesitant to mention these reports and so on, even at the state and local level, because that's the way our US government and tribal, and that's the way the US government is organized. And unlike other countries where it's mostly federal level. So that's one place that I didn't see any reports about the threats to wild rice. And so maybe in the next round, y'all could think about submitting something regarding this threat. The other area that I want to talk about in this short time is something that I started to do and then continued with the support of the Treaty Council. And that's this whole work on within the World Intellectual Property Organization. And right now, there is a process to negotiate a treaty on 3 items. And the whole idea was effective protection for these areas with Indigenous peoples in mind. And so it's on traditional knowledge, traditional cultural expressions, and genetic resources. And so genetic resources is going to be very important. So the idea was to protect, but what's happened in fact is that in this process, it's full of patent and intellectual property lawyers who represent states, and they're seem to be more concerned about protection of corporations and corporate interests and so on. And so the Indigenous Caucus constantly has to remind them that we have standards that we want them to adopt as minimum standards in this process. And it's a constant reminder. So when I went, they've been negotiating for, I don't know, 18 years now or something. So, and I've been at it maybe 5 or 6 years. And so when I went and I heard the statements made by states, including some that were signatories to the UN Declaration, I thought I'd step back in time 20 years. So it's really frightening to see how little regard or little knowledge they had of the UN Declaration. And so that's a place where we've really had to do a lot of education, and it's still a place for a lot of growth. And people shy away from it because they think it, and I'm not an intellectual property lawyer by any stretch, but people shy away from it because it's so highly technical. But people with intimate knowledge of the land and the environment and wild rice that you all have are exactly the kind of people that need to teach lessons at places like this. In fact, I've encouraged Rochelle to do maybe a side event, one of these sessions in the future when we can travel again, or maybe we'll do it virtually, on the threats, genetic resource related threats to wild rice. I saw that there was a patent that was issued when I was doing a little research before this. So let me say, and when I mentioned doing wild rice to one of my colleagues in the UN, she's from the Philippines, she said, well, there's no protection for wild rice. And then I double checked, and actually there are, because rice worldwide is such a staple, there are conventions that allow for a lot of sharing, but that's not the case for wild rice, because wild rice is not like regular rice, as you know. And so there is really a need to pay attention to protecting wild rice. And in this world, in the intellectual property world, someone can say that they took, and they did something to it to make it unique and different and their own, and, apply for a patent. And that's the thing to really be cautious of. And the irony is that while this whole effort was initially to protect Indigenous peoples, it's really become a battle against people wanting to protect private interests. And so it's an ongoing process. And so, of course, meetings this year have been postponed due to the virus. So let's see, I think I'm just gonna focus on those 2 things, but I want to say that the UN Declaration and the OAS Declaration, by the way, provisions on cultural rights and the ties to environmental rights are, I think, really critical. And you've already expressed those in everything you've said, but you have the added support of international instruments. And I think cases like what are being discussed today are really great examples of how this works. And so I'm really going to encourage Rochelle and other folks who know wild rice so intimately to share their story and why it needs to be protected and how it's so closely tied to culture. I think it's a great example that people in the WIPO need to learn about, because they're much more familiar with other rice around the world. So I'm going to stop there, and yeah, I think I'm going to stop. So thanks. Can't hear you.
Okay, I'm giving Chairman Wiggins a run for his money talking on the mute button. Thank you so much for joining us, June. We really, really appreciate it. You know, we had a discussion yesterday, as she said, and made a bit of a joke. Surrounded by shenabs, she will be on the web. So, we're so happy to have you share your expertise in the international arena. It really is unprecedented, the work that you do. It's important to also say that June is a tireless advocate for her people. She is constantly working. She's in court sessions. She's at the UN. She's doing other community work and also caring for family. Thank you so much for joining us today, June. It was a real honor.
Thank you.
And we hope that if you have any other questions, please drop them in the chat. Just a small disclaimer, I had to disconnect. I was having issues hearing. I couldn't hear anyone, so I disconnected and I lost the chat that had all been there before. So we're working on recovering that, but also please feel free to go ahead and send your questions again. We will have time for a robust Q&A at the end of this webinar as well. So once again, miigwech June, and we will move on to our next panelists. It's my honor to introduce Owen Schwartz. Owen is the community dietitian for Great Lakes Indian Fishing and Wildlife Commission, GLFWC. And GLFWC is an agency of 11 Ojibwe tribes in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and all signatories to treaties retaining to off-reservation treaty rights, or what we also call ceded territory that we retain our inherent rights to. GLFWC is committed to the implementation of its members' off-reservation treaty rights to hunt, fish, and gather in the ceded territories. Owen's work at GLFWC is focused on the use of traditional treaty harvested resources as food. Her work has included nutritional education around traditional foods and cooking demonstrations as well. More recently, her work included food safety and model food code, education for institutional and commercial use. In her free time, Owen enjoys foraging, gardening, and spending time with family and friends. Welcome, Owen. We look forward to you sharing how we can utilize our wild rice and continue to share that nutrition with our friends and family. Owen, you have the floor.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Rochelle, for that welcome. Hope you guys can hear me. It looks like I'm getting some head nods, so I think that things are going well. It's an honor to not only be a part of the conference, but it's humbling to be a part of this fantastic panel with some of our most wonderful speakers. So thank you again for that honor. As Rochelle said, it's my opportunity and honor to talk about using wild rice as food. And so I did prepare a slideshow, so I hope it's all right if I screen share that with everyone now. So we'll go ahead and just open that up. Can everyone see that? Awesome, perfect. We'll go ahead and attempt to start from the beginning, and I will just go ahead and turn off my video to keep my internet going smoothly. So like I said, we're going to talk about not only eating wild rice, but we're going to talk about how eating wild rice can be a solution for some of the things that are troubling in these times. So here we have a beautiful bowl of wild rice berry salad with a delicious maple syrup, or if you're lucky enough to have maple sugar, that's also fantastic. And some of our sacred berries are in there as well. So when we think about wild rice, I think of it as something that can be utilized to help prevent some of the things that we're seeing as far as chronic disease in Indian country, and so that's something that I'm here to kind of talk a little bit more about today. So let's take a look at what those numbers are. So for most of us, these are kind of familiar numbers. In Native American communities, there are disproportionately high rates of chronic disease. And the three that are coming to mind when we think about food and lifestyle, what we call chronic disease and lifestyle diseases, diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart disease are kind of a trifecta. And for Native American communities, the most recent data, which is from 2017 and 2018, indicates that Native Americans are 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with diabetes than their non-Hispanic counterparts, and also 50% more likely to be diagnosed with heart disease and 10% more likely to be diagnosed with high blood pressure. Diabetes contributes to 60% of kidney failure in Native American communities, and this is all from the Centers of Disease Control and the Health and Human Services Office of Minority Health. So those are some pretty stark numbers, and we're going to take a look at how Minomin can positively contribute to bringing those numbers down. So when we think about prevention and management strategies, typically we hear eat healthy, and that's what we're asked to do by our physicians and our medical professionals to increase physical activity and to manage stress. That doing those 3 things together can help to bring down those rates of heart disease, bring down the blood pressure, and bring down incidences of diabetes, specifically type 2 is what we typically see. And I think that wild rice embodies all 3 of those recommendations. It's not a silver bullet, but it certainly is part of the solution, part of the cure, and something that was used from time immemorial to prevent these illnesses to begin with. And I think that not only incorporates eating Minomin, but also the harvesting of Minomin. Because when we think about foods, we think about it all the way through, from the harvest all the way through the sustenance. So speaking of sustenance, let's take a look at our Minomin nutrition and start there. So wild rice is a healthy whole grain, which means that as it's being processed from a resource into a food, the bran, or the outside layer, which is where it gets its beautiful dark rich color, is retained. Endosperm, which is the white inside of the rice, is there as well, which gives us many of the calories. And then the germ, which is where we get a lot of micronutrients and fats, are retained in the seed as well. And so you can see that over here in the picture on the right. Wild rice is a nutrient dense food, which means that for the calories that you take in for wild rice, you're getting a lot of nutrition. So a lot of minerals, a lot of vitamins, a lot of like phenolic compounds, or compounds that are phytochemicals, things that are found only in plants, that give our body benefits that we're still trying to understand through science and research. So here's some nutrition facts on the right-hand side. We're going to talk a little bit more about those. And this is for about a half cup of wild rice cooked and ready to eat. So compared to other rices, wild rice is a little bit lower in calories for the same amount of rice. So for a half cup of rice, it's only about 195 to 100 calories. It kind of depends on where you're looking, but we're still in that 100-calorie range. White rice and brown rice tend to be a little bit higher, closer to 120 and 130, which kind of small numbers, but it still makes a difference overall. Wild rice is rich in dietary fiber, and dietary fiber is important for heart disease and diabetes, and the fact that there's research to show that fiber can help with blood sugar regulation and slow the rate of blood sugar entering the bloodstream, sugar entering the bloodstream, and is associated with reducing blood pressure in whole. Wild rice is also rich in niacin, which is known to have some cholesterol lowering effects. Niacin is typically used for the body for a grain, and specifically for a rice. Wild rice is rich in protein. Wild rice has 2 or 3 grams more protein than white or brown rice. So those are pretty high numbers. It has a really good protein to starch ratio, which helps with utilizing the nutrients that are in that wild rice. So when we're thinking about choosing which rice goes with dinner, wild rice would be a better choice overall. You're going to get a little bit more protein and a little bit more fiber that way as well. Wild rice is rich in magnesium, which is not only good for building strong teeth and bones, but also has blood sugar regulation effects and blood pressure regulation. Bodies that have the appropriate amount of magnesium, the magnesium that they need, we typically see lower blood pressure in those folks. So that's important, again, when we think about heart disease, and also when we think about diabetes. And then for zinc, wild rice is high in zinc. You'll see numbers of 10%. I've even seen rice that's as high as 15% in zinc. Sometimes that has to do with where it's harvested or the type of rice. Wild rice is higher in zinc than oats, corn, and wheat. So again, a good choice. What zinc does for our bodies is it helps with our immune systems, which is really important nowadays, helps keep our immune systems healthy and active. It's very important for wound healing. It's necessary in order to heal our wounds. And then we think about it in the terms of heart disease. We see that folks that have low amounts of zinc in their body, that can negatively impact their heart function and their cardiac function. So by returning your body back to the appropriate amounts of zinc for your body, we see that normalizes some of those cardio functions. So it's got cardioprotective effects is some of the terminology we use for that. Wild rice is also rich in antioxidants or antioxidants. Depending on which study you look at, that can range between 10% higher than white rice to 30% higher than white rice. So it's really rich in these antioxidant compounds, which are found in tons of foods, but specifically in plant foods, we see a lot of antioxidants. These are important for controlling free radicals. They can help with inflammation. And as we look into nutritional sciences, we're still trying to understand the full scope of how antioxidants work with the body to help maintain health overall. One thing that I did want to note on this is that kind of notorious for holding on to their antioxidants after you eat them. So it's, even though those antioxidants are in the rice, eating that rice by itself, we don't typically see it translating as high antioxidants in the body or high antioxidant activity in the body. And so I would say that this is an area for more research to see how other foods eaten in combination with wild rice might have positive effects on like the bioavailability or the bioaccessibility, meaning your body's ability to actually access and use the antioxidants. I think that there's more research to be done there. So as you can see, wild rice has some fantastic nutrients that can really be a positive impact in preventing or decreasing rates or incidences of heart disease, diabetes, and high blood pressure. One thing that I wanted to point out is we've talked already today about impacts of humans on the landscape and water quality, and that potentially could impact wild rice. And this is something that's certainly come across our minds and into our conversations at it was funded by the Administration for Native Americans underneath their social and economic development strategies funding opportunity. We were able to do a scientific literature review and look through what was currently available in the scientific literature around chemical contaminants in wild rice. And I'm happy to report that what we found is that wild rice wild rice grains, so the part that you eat, has low contaminant levels, and there were no contaminant levels of concern found through our literature review. But we did find that there were some gaps in that knowledge base, in the scientific knowledge and literature that we were looking at, and we felt that it was important to take a look at tribally harvested wild rice, and also specifically inorganic arsenic. That's something that we didn't see in the scientific literature, but when it comes to white rice and brown rice, inorganic arsenic is something of concern. I know that it's already been discussed today, but I just want to clarify again that white rice and brown rice are not the same as wild rice. Wild rice is an aquatic grass, whereas brown and white rice come from a different type of plant, from the true rice plant. Orza is the scientific name for white rice. So we were able to do to perform a study in 2019, and we worked with many harvesters throughout ceded territory in our area, and so that would be Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. We were able to collect about 40 samples of traditionally harvested wild rice. Some of it was traditionally processed, some of it was mechanically processed wild rice. And we were able to send those off to different laboratories and work with a couple of scientists to analyze that rice. And I'm happy again to report that we found that wild rice is low in heavy metals, and that it's low in inorganic arsenic, and that it has no levels that would negatively impact human health. So we're excited to release that. And you can find out more information about those 2 studies and reports on our GlyphWick website, which we'll show later. So that is good news for those of us who love eating Minomin. I wanted to talk a little bit about some studies that have been done specifically around wild rice and consumption, and how wild rice can have kind of novel impacts on some of the diseases that we're talking about today. And there have been several studies that have been done on wild rice in mice. So this is a preliminary data, and some of that doesn't always translate over to humans, but I think that it helps us to see the possibilities that are there and helps to kind of validate what some people are already feeling. Some studies show that when mice or rats that are fed wild rice, that they have cardioprotective effects. And so there's a suppression of triglycerides in the blood, suppression of those triglycerides being made. So their blood triglyceride levels, go down as they eat the wild rice in compared to the control groups or the other groups that are being fed different foods. This is also similar for cholesterol production, that cholesterol production cholesterol in the blood, those levels go down as well when we see mice eating wild rice compared to their control groups. And we also see a reduction in blood lipids. That includes triglycerides, that includes low density lipoproteins, which are known as LDL, which are known as the bad cholesterol. And then there's also another one that's a little lesser known called very low density lipoproteins. And those can be, there's some evidence to say that those are pretty detrimental as well. So what we see is that, at least in mice, that there's a reduction of blood lipids, blood triglycerides, and cholesterol in the mice that were given wild rice. There's also been some indication that there's beneficial effects of on insulin resistance when eating wild rice. We see this increase in folks that are pre-diabetic or have diabetes. And insulin resistance, just to give you a little bit of background for those that don't know, when we eat food, and specifically if that food has any sort of carbohydrate or sugar, our body sends out a message through the bloodstream, and that message is carried on a compound called insulin. And insulin tells your blood cells, tells your cells through your blood, hey, there's sugar in the bloodstream, come and get it. And your body needs to use, the only way that we get energy is through glucose, which is made by foods that we eat, but also made by our body. And so insulin is running around telling everybody in the body, there's glucose out here, come and get it. And insulin resistance is how fast cells come to the table to get that glucose out of the bloodstream. And so what we see is that people that have high insulin resistance, that glucose stays in the bloodstream a lot longer, that their bodies aren't bringing it into their cells, and so their cells aren't getting the nutrition that they need. The reverse to that is insulin sensitivity, or the rating for that is insulin sensitivity. People that have high insulin sensitivity, when insulin goes around the bloodstream, their cells react much quicker and come to pull the glucose out of the bloodstream a lot faster. So insulin resistance is one of those terms, or one of those indicators that we use to kind of identify if people are becoming pre-diabetic or diabetic. So what we're seeing with wild rice is that that mice that were given wild rice, they had a higher insulin sensitivity than the mice that were given wild rice, or given other foods rice. So there does seem to be like a beneficial effect there as well. So that's exciting news too. When we think about eating rice, we typically think about our long grain wild rice, which is delicious, most often cooked up as a side dish or maybe as a casserole, and that's delicious. But there's some other ways to eat rice too that might not always be thought about. There's something called soup rice or broken rice. So this is maybe rice that's at the bottom of the bag. They're not the long grain pieces. They've been kind of broken through just through time and through weight. And these are typically used for making soup, which is why it's called soup rice. But you can also use this broken rice and grind it down into a gluten-free flour, which you'll see at the far right side of that image, or wild rice meal, which is on the left side of that image. And the wild rice meal is similar to cornmeal in its texture. Of course, it has that nutty wild rice taste. And then the wild rice flour carries that dense density to it, and also carries that nice roasted nutty flavor as well. It is a gluten-free rice, or excuse me, gluten-free grain. So that's something to keep in mind for those that are interested in baking with wild rice. End up with a hockey puck. So for those of you that are interested in gluten-free baking and using wild rice flour, you might want to do a little bit of reading on that. There's also another one called puff wild rice. This is a favorite, especially during ricing season. When you're parching wild rice, if the pan gets too hot, sometimes it'll naturally just puff and kind of turn out like popcorn, which is what you see here in our last image on the right-hand side. But you can recreate that at home too. And it tastes a lot like I said, like popcorn. It's pretty delicious. So just some other ways to get wild rice into the diet. And so now we've talked a lot about wild rice nutrition. I want to talk about how harvesting wild rice can have positive impacts on the body. So we mentioned earlier that one of the prevention or management methods is physical activity and increasing that. And to go out and harvest wild rice, it is physically active. We've already heard about going out into the rice beds. People are typically taking a canoe, so that is powered by hand. We either have folks that are the polers, so they're using a pole, as you can see here. The gentleman who's standing up in the canoe has a pole that he's using to propel the boat. And then we've got a knocker that's sitting in front of him who's knocking the rice into the canoe. Some folks will paddle, but all of this is done by hand. So all of the propulsion and energy that's being used to collect the wild rice is done by hand and done by the human body. So it takes a lot of energy. And there's research out there to show that doing physical activity it can increase your insulin sensitivity. So your body is using up that sugar that's in the bloodstream a lot faster. It can increase your insulin sensitivity for up to 24 hours after your physical activity. So we're seeing some positive benefits. We all know about the endorphins that you get from working out, which are the feel-good chemicals. They make you feel really good, make you feel really happy. Also, folks that are doing these physical activities are getting stronger. If you're the polar, you're using your whole body. It's a full body workout from the top of your head all the way to your feet to maintain balance. You're using your core to maintain your place in space and stability as you use your arms to walk up the pole. And so you're using your shoulders to walk up the pole or to lift the pole out of the water. You're using your biceps and your triceps. And so you're building that lean muscle, and lean muscle utilizes energy better. It burns off energy better. It creates stronger bodies. It also helps, the longer we can keep our lean muscle and strong, that helps us with balance later on in life and helps us with lower or all-cause mortality later in life. So it's important to stay strong. For our knockers, typically people don't have chairs in their canoes. I mean, some people do, but typically we see what's indicated in the picture here. So you have to use your core to keep your body sitting upright. And so it's using those abdominal muscles and the back muscles. And then the motion of bringing the rice over your canoe uses your biceps, and your triceps also uses your upper back muscles, your latissimus dorsi and your trapezius up there, and then your pectoral muscles or your chest muscles in the front of the body as well. So it's still a workout, and it's still, you can tell when you've been ricing, then the next day you're pretty sore, so you can feel those muscles working. And so I thought it might be interesting to see some what it might look like as far as caloric burn when you go out and rice. So I did some estimates, and so these are not exact. To the best of my knowledge, there's no research to show how much energy is used when you go out ricing. So I did my best estimates here. So bear with me. So I looked at from a 165-pound person to a 200-pound person. If they are the knocker, they could be burning somewhere between 230 to almost 300 calories an hour. Typically, when people go out to rice, they're going out for several hours. So that could be 2 to 8 hours. So it could be a long day. So that's a lot of energy used. And then for the polar, they're doing a lot more work, and they're standing up and using their balance. They're going to be burning upwards of 300 to almost 450 calories. So we're seeing a lot of calorie burn, which can be positive for weight loss. But physical activity is not only good for calorie burn and weight loss, but for maintaining that lean muscle. And so moving on from harvesting the rice, we want to take a look at traditional processing in kind of a similar lens. So traditional processing in and of itself is physical activity and exercise. It takes a lot of work. If you've ever been to a rice camp, I know Lisa mentioned earlier, it takes a lot of people to do that. You're kind of working all day. that's also another fantastic way to keep those muscles going and to burn off some calories. So we looked at shorter stints here. So these are all in 15-minute increments. Just because sometimes you're trading up with other people on the jobs that you're doing, especially when it comes to dancing on the rice. It's pretty vigorous. Not everybody can do it for a 30-minute time period. So we looked at 15 minutes. And again, there's no scientific but some of my best estimates here are about 17 to 20 calories per 15 minutes. And parching, as you can see here in the picture, it's taking that raw rice that's been dried in the sun and moving it around a pot or a pan to get the water, the excess moisture out of the rice. And then the next step, the most vigorous part, I would say, is the dancing on the rice. And so a dancer has to hold their body weight a bit. So this is a lot of activity. And I would say that at a minimum, they're burning 70 to 80 calories per 15 minutes. So we're still a pretty good calorie burn. There's a lot of muscles that are being worked here. The leg muscles are being worked, the arm, as you dance on that rice, the arm muscles are being worked to hold the body. And then the core, as you twist from side to side, is doing a lot of activity there in the back as well to stabilize. And then winnowing itself is also its own physical activity. There's a lot of strength that goes into this movement as well, for not only standing, but using the muscles of the biceps and the triceps to help winnow that rice. And for this, we're looking at a minimum of a 40 to 50 calorie burn per 15 minutes. So again, a lot of calories go into it. By the time you've done your 45-minute run through the parching, dancing, and winnowing, it's almost time for you to eat half a cup of wild rice to replace the calories that you've burned in doing this. So very highly physically active process. And so the third prong, or the third tier of a management or prevention plan, is our stress management. And I would say that that Minomin key, the harvesting of wild rice, is in and of itself stress management. And while I don't have data around this, I think we can all kind of walk through these and see represented the maybe the non-calculated positive effects of going out to harvest that rice. And so I wanted to showcase 4 really quickly. The time in nature, it's already been mentioned that being out in the canoe on the rice on the beautiful day, which is typically when you're going to rice, that this is just really refreshing for the mind, body, and soul, and can be a part of that stress management strategy in practicing these traditional ways. Another aspect of stress management is the food security that comes from wild rice harvesting. Once you're done harvesting rice and processing that rice, it takes away, it adds food security to a family in need. This is something that's not only shared throughout the community, but it's also something that's utilized in individual ricers' home, and something that lasts on the shelf. So it's shelf stable. So there's not that fear of, if I don't use it quickly enough, then it's going to rot and all that work goes to waste. Food insecurity is incredibly stressful, especially we're going through a lot of that right now. So we can all kind of get a sense of how difficult that is, and it's incredibly stressful, and it takes a toll on our households. And so being able to have that food security, even if it's for a season, can be quite a bit of change, can be a positive impact on families and communities as a whole. Practicing and going out wild racing is part of that cultural identity. It's connecting with your roots and connecting with your ancestors. And I think we're going to have someone who's going to talk a bit more about that coming up here. So I won't spend too much time here, but that's incredibly important for that stress management, that sense of place and that sense of who I am, and that connection and the ability to pass that information and that knowledge on is really important in healing, and helps to reduce some of that stress that we feel. And then lastly, it builds and strengthens relationships and bonds. If you're going out ricing, there's 2 people in that, and if you guys don't get along, you're either not coming back with rice, or somebody's not coming back in the canoe. They're going to be swimming back. So it really helps to build those relationships. You're usually out there on the rice, and like I said, a beautiful day, and you can hear a lot of laughter from everybody around you. And as Lisa mentioned, it's a group thing. It's not just 2 people in that canoe that, if you're doing a rice camp, then you're bringing it back to the rest of your family and multiple families, a bigger family structure, who's going to help to process that rice, whether it's in a traditional way or through more modern means. But that whole the whole way of bringing in wild rice is really all about relationships. Even spending time in the water with those animal relations and the plant relations is all really important and part of that stress management to help us keep it anchored and to help build on those connections that help support us throughout the year. So that's most of my presentation today. I want to say Chimigwech and thank you so much for the time and opportunity. If you want to get a hold of me, email is probably the best way these days. If you'd like to know more about Glyphwick and the work that we also have a Facebook page that we keep up to date. Know more about our project that we currently are working on right now, I just want to let you know that we do have some more webinars focused on traditional foods. And those are free and available on our Glyphwick website, and you can check those out on our homepage underneath the current news and events section. The webinars are a little bit different than the webinar that we've done today. They focus on not only nutrition information, but they talk about food safety. They talk more about the contaminant information and about the model food code that we've got that we're building right now. So with that, I want to say Chimigwech and pass the mic on.
Miigwech to you, Owen. Wow, that was really just a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. I think people really really could picture themselves out on the water and ricing and get a good idea of how our rice is harvested and the process of it. And then really just how it goes from the lakes to the tables. I think we're all a little hungry now for how different ways that it's prepared. You know, really part of us decolonizing our diets and getting rid of these processed foods that have impacted our people so much is going back to the land and going back to our traditional methods of preparing. So thank you for sharing that with us. Each panelist today will receive a Glyphwick cookbook so that they're able to try some recipes with the wild rice and see different ways that other people are putting it together. So I would encourage all of the attendees today to visit the Glyphwick website, order your own cookbook as well, and check out the work that they have done. Glyphwick is really just an outstanding organization made up of our tribal leaders. As Owen said in her introduction, they have a direct hand in working to protect our lands and our waters and our resources. So thank you to Owen and to Glyphwick for your time today. We really appreciate it. We do have a couple questions for you in particular, but we're going to hold off on those and welcome our final speaker on the panel, and then we'll open up for a Q&A session at the very end for everybody. So once again, thank you, Owen. And I'm going to move on to our final speaker, who is Shannon Martin, Executive Director of Zibiwing Center of Anishinaabe Culture and Lifeways. Miigwech, Shannon, you have the floor.
Well, bonjour. Nindawena mani duk, nungu kwandish nikas, bijun do dem. Machi beneshuish bodawadami menwa superior Ojibwe Anishinaabe kwayandao. Nijo medeo mede kwe menwa Three Fires Society Gizhaadaandaa kwayandao. Shakanashi muin majima. Well, good morning, everyone. We're almost at our Nakwe Gizhik time, so that's a nod to my Uncle Frank. That's his Anishinaabe spirit name. So high noon is always a beautiful time for us. But I'm coming to you live from the Zibiwing Center of Anishinaabe Culture and Lifeways. And we're happy that our staff is able to report back to work. We were furloughed for a few months. So I'm excited to be back and especially honored to be a part of this wonderful virtual Minomin conference today. But I wanted to speak to you all about the work we do here at Zibiwing, and our work is centered on education and outreach. Our work is also centered on the rights of our Gitee Anishinaabe people. And in that work, we are tasked and given the great responsibility on behalf of the Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe of Michigan to repatriate our ancestors, to bring them home and their funerary bundle belongings from various museums and institutions across this country. The Zibiwing organization, Zebwing Cultural Society, started in response to the legislation of NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act that was passed in 1990. So in response to that act, a grassroots group of tribal members began to respond to the letters that contained inventories of our ancestral remains and summaries of ethnographic collections that were spread out across the country. The group formed in 1993 and 1994, and they were officially sanctioned as a tribal organization by Tribal Council in 1996. And I recognize and want to pay respect to the humble and very important beginnings of the Zebwing Cultural Society that grew into the Zebwing Center of Anishinaabe Culture and Lifeways. Because that work continues daily for us here at Zebwing. We are continuously locating and working hard to bring our ancestors home. And through that work is what I'm getting to, is that the ancestors, when we bring them home and put them back into the earth or recommit them back to the earth, that direct connection to them, we truly believes provides community and spiritual well-being for our tribal people. It also provides a stronger direct link to our Gitee Anishinaabe, or those ancestors who carried forward this beautiful life. And granted, it was interrupted during those times of colonization, but their blood memories still flowed through us. So when we reach back and help in those ways and reach back to live the way they wanted us to live, we are reactivating and triggering our own blood memory. And that's the part of the work we do here at Zebwing, through education, through preservation, reactivation, and revitalization, not only for this beautiful tribal community, but we reach out to other Great Lakes Anishinaabe. I want to tell you about a project that happened in 2014. Unfortunately, due to construction, inadvertent discovery took place on the west side of the state. And this was in was in the area of Gun Lake Potawatomi country and Little River Band of Ottawa country. And what took place was Michigan Department of Transportation was building a bypass on the U.S., the Michigan's M231 project, US 31, the old US road. And they discovered an occupation site of our Gitee Anishinaabe people. And they uncovered that, and then immediately Section 106 was triggered of the National Historic Preservation Act. And all of the tribes here in Michigan responded to that. And many tribes were on site, helping to monitor, helping to assist with maintaining the sensitivity and the respect to what was inadvertently discovered. But in that discovery, there was a fully intact wild rice Minomin cache. Within this cache, it was placed in the earth in an earthen, a clay earthen pot. And that rice, once it was uncovered, the seeds looked like they could be as viable as seeds that we find today. They were dried seeds. So this raised many questions for the tribal nations in Michigan who were part of the project, as well as the archaeological resource group that was hired in by Michigan Department of Transportation to work at the site. What it uncovered is that occupation site of our Gitee Anishinaabe people was close to 800 years old. So what that says to us is there was a beautiful, thriving community. The rice, we don't know if it was river rice or lake rice, but what we do know is that that beautiful connection was there to understand that our blood memory and what we do has gone unchallenged. It has gone without, for many of our communities and our families, has not been interrupted from the times of our ancient ancestors, our Gitee and Anishinaabe. To find that rice was clear indication of our beautiful Minomin culture and our respect and care for it. Other work that we've participated in here at Zebwing through our NACBRA consultations with museums and institutions and universities is we started to ask the simple question to them, but a profound question: do you have seeds in your ethnographic collections? Because what we've come to understand during those years of salvage archaeology, when our ancestors' occupation sites, when our burial grounds, when our sacred mounds were all being excavated and uncovered, and our people were being stolen, salvage archaeologists and anthropologists were also going out and taking our seeds from us and taking information about our medicines and how to make tinctures. So these types of materials are also being held in many museums and institutions. So I encourage those who work with NAGPRA for your tribe, for your organization, who are tribal historic preservation officers, the great responsibility to bring our ancestors home is also opening up those doorways, those paths to bring home important ancestral information and materials like seeds and information like field notes that anthropologists have been writing over the last 100 and 150 years. One of the educational aspects that we perform here at Zebwing and provide to in response to what our community needs are is that our community directed us to showcase and to provide an exhibition on what are the threats that our people are experiencing environmentally, what are the threats are we experiencing spiritually. And shortly after Standing Rock, community members were coming in and asking us to provide information and public information on what's happening not only here in the Great Lakes, but to Indigenous people globally. So we held a community meeting, and through that meeting, we came up with a changing or temporary exhibition called Standing Rock Solid. And Standing Rock Solid was an artistic response to threats to our land and life. This exhibition opened on April 22nd, 2017, and it ran until September 30th, 2017. But through Standing Rock Solid, that entire exhibition was showcasing artists that provided three-dimensional art, that provided poetry, prose, activist signs, protector signs that they would take to Mauna Kea, or that they would take to Standing Rock. So that was a beautiful exhibition that brought awareness to the greater public. And when we can do those types of projects where we raise awareness with the public, we build allies and we can build advocacy for ourselves. Zebwing also hosts Wild Rice and Mother Earth Weeks, and we bring in up to 500 school children to the museum, and they're able to go through different hands-on stations that we developed to have more respect and understanding about wild rice and about protecting our Mother Earth. So the work we do here is centered on helping with revitalization, with education and outreach, and in fact, it helps to build advocacy and coalition building. One of the most beautiful projects that we accomplished last fall from August until October was we hosted a birch bark canoe build right here in the lobby of the center. And the canoe build went on from 9 a.m. until 6 p.m. daily, and people were allowed to stop in and help to birth this beautiful birch bark canoe. And this was funded by a grant through the tribal college, the Saginaw Chippewa Tribal College, through a USDA grant. We kept track of individuals, of students, folks that came to build the canoe, and there were over 1,500 people that helped put their hands on building that beautiful birch bark canoe. And that canoe's name is Nijmanadua, which is a two-spirit. And it was named two-spirit because there were so many spirits that came to work on it, and it was built between the summer and fall. We put the canoe in the water in December, early December, and it was a beautiful day. We sang to the water. We offered offerings of sema to the water, and then we put the canoe in. And the first person that went in was our tribal chief and his wife, so the first lady. I think that it was you could hear a tree branch drop outside because we were all worried that it didn't sink, because Ronnie Echtel, our chief at the time, is a former football player for Central Michigan University. But the canoe floated. It was beautiful. It glided, and now that canoe works at Tawas Lake, where the tribe has purchased close to 902 acres on Tawas Lake, and it includes over 1 mile of frontage on the lake, and that lake is now the ricing lake for the tribe. So ricing camps happen up there. I want to say that that canoe, we can't record in our recent history how long ago a birch bark canoe was built in this community. So that was the first one that was built in recent memory. And now it's working in a beautiful Minomin Lake up near Tawas City, Michigan. And the tribe now, through their own resources, took the land back effort to purchase land for the future of the people to always have that place to go and wild rice. So just some, beautiful projects that are happening with revitalization, reactivation. That lake also welcomes other tribes to send up folks to rice there. My tribe that I am enrolled in, as enrolled citizen with the Machi Beneshuish Band of Gun Lake Potawatomi Indians, reactivated cultural protocols. So representatives from my tribe come to the Saginaw Chippewa Tribal Council, to the leadership, bringing a bundle of gifts. That gift bundle is presented to the chief and tribal council from members of a delegation of my tribe, asking if, with respect, if we can wild rice on their lake. Because in my territory over on the southwest side of Michigan, I think everyone might know that the Enbridge spilled oil, had a horrible oil spill within the Kalamazoo River. And the Kalamazoo River was a river rice river. So that affected our abilities to harvest wild rice in our own community. So we asked the Saginaw Chippewa and those beautiful protocols to go into another's territory have been reactivated, where gift bundles are given. So beautiful things happening over here in the Mitten. And of course, here in the Mitten, many of our lakes and rivers have been devastated by pollution and by overpopulation and by manure and sewer runoff from farms and municipalities. That wild rice is sometimes very hard to revitalize here in the Lower Peninsula. But we're working hard to keep this beautiful, beautiful tradition and beautiful way of life going. So that's all I wanted to add to the conversation, is to think about seeds and how beautiful they are, and where they're being held captive outside of our own communities, and bringing our ancestral heirloom seeds back and revitalizing cultural practice, building birch bark canoes in your community, having workshops to build knockers and push poles, and getting our birch bark canoes out on the water. So with that, I say miigwech, meet you. It's been an honor. Uncle Frank, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this day.
Thank you.
Miigwech, Shannon, thank you so much for joining us today. Really bringing us home at the end of our webinar, for hanging in there throughout the day with us. I've shared the link to your organization for people who want to see more about what the work of Zebuing is. We just got a little taste, and I think a lot of us are left wanting to hear more about the amazing work that you do for your community and for all Anishinaabe. I think this is also a great opportunity for me to let everybody know. We did mention earlier that this was a conference that was meant to be in person, and we had to adjust to the times, and I think it has really turned out to be a fantastic webinar. The best it could be to hold this virtually. But this is just a precursor. We still plan to hold this conference in person as soon as it's appropriate and safe to do so. So I want everyone to be sure to stay tuned on the iitc.org website as we continue to work towards another conference where you'll hopefully be able to hear more from the presenters that were here today, and two others who unfortunately were unable to join us due to some technical difficulties, and we look forward to hearing from them in person as well. So with that, we have about 15 minutes left, and we will take some time to field some questions. And then we will have each one of the co-sponsors or organizers of the event have the opportunity to have some closing words. So the first question that was posed about wild rice while Owen was speaking that I referenced earlier, I did want to go back to. Owen or anyone who would like to answer this, people are wondering the nutritional facts on wild rice and what's the difference between the rice that grows on lakes and the rice that is cultivated by individuals. I'm not sure who wants to take that, but please.
Sure, I'll get started, and if there's anyone else that wants to join in, please feel free to do so. A lot of the studies that we look at do use cultivated wild rice for their analysis, and I don't know if it has to do with the ability to get wild rice that's cultivated is a little bit easier to get it off the shelf around the world where some of the research is being done, but a lot of it is cultivated. There is some data that was done before wild rice became a cultivated crop, so that happened kind of extensively in 1965. I think it was first started around 1950. So there's some data that predates that kind of gives us an indication that the nutrition information that we're seeing is on the right path as far as some of that macro information indicates. But yeah, it would be nice to see a lot more information around traditionally harvested wild rice and the true wild rice, not the cultivated wild rice. That information just isn't as available as we would like it to be.
Thank you, Owen. Would anyone like to add to that? Okay, I will just say it's important to note that the wild rice that she showed that was kind of popped, that rice has to be hand processed. It has to be, it cannot be put through a machine. It has to be hand parched or hand harvested for it to be able to do that. So I just wanted to point that out when you are looking for rice, to make sure that you take into account the region that it came from and how it was processed. Okay, great. Well, I do want to also just share quickly, this isn't a question, but it is Ken Cohen shared with the group about the nutritional value of wild rice. He thanks us for the great info. There's also research that shows food eaten slowly and in accord with cultural traditions and protocols metabolize differently and are healthier. the way the food is gathered and consumed, for example, with prayer and respect, even reduces the risk of heart disease from animal fats or cholesterol-rich foods that may accompany a wild rice meal. This goes in conjunction with what Owen was teaching us about the wild rice, the nutritional benefits for our people, and why it's important that we continue to include this in our diets. I just want to apologize. I think maybe my mic might be going in and out. I'm having some issues as well, and I've lost the chat a couple times. So with that, we've got 15 minutes left. I don't see any other questions in the chat at this moment, but like I said, I did lose some. So if you would like to pose any additional questions, is there somewhere you would recommend we could order or purchase respectfully sourced wild rice? I put that to all the panelists.
This is Owen again. I'll just jump in, and I'm sure there's other folks out there who have some sources of respectfully harvested wild rice that can be purchased. On our Glyphwick website, it's already in the chat, GLIF as in Frank, WC as in Charlie.org, and then /Minomin will take you to a page, or you can find that on our homepage, that lists wild rice harvesters who we work with every year to touch base with and see if they're still offering wild rice for sale. And they are usually wild rice harvesters and wild rice processors that are within Wisconsin, Michigan, or Minnesota, that are members of our Glyphwick member tribes. I know there's a site through White Earth as well that has some wild rice there for sale. But those are the two places that I can think of off the top of my head that would be available via the internet.
Thank you, Owen. Anyone else with anything to add?
Yeah, how do you plant wild rice?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
How do you plant wild rice? Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. I'm not a wild rice biologist, but I can tell you what I've seen and what I've read in some of our brochures. And so if anyone else again wants to jump in, please do so. I think that there's a couple of different ways, but one pretty popular way is to broadcast the seeds. So I know that every year Glyphwick will purchase from ricers what we call green rice. And so green rice is rice that's fresh off the lake. It hasn't been parched, it hasn't been processed. So it's the viable seed. So once you parch that rice, that basically nullifies the ability for that seed to grow if you get all that water out of there. So we get the green rice, and then many of our wild rice biologists will go out and broadcast the seeds. They'll take handfuls of that green rice and they'll go to areas, as was mentioned earlier, that are places similar to wild rice is already being grown, so it has the right conditions, and they'll throw that seed out straight from the boat. I did participate in an event that was hosted at Red Cliff where they did the broadcasting of the seeds, but they also tried seed balls. And so I believe my recollection of that is that they took the wild rice seeds and they kind of put them into wet soil and kind of formed them into balls and let them dry, and then they threw those out. I'm not sure if that turned out to be a better way to do it or more viable. I couldn't say to that, but I know that just off my own personal experience and looking through some of our brochures here, those are the two ways that I've seen to plant wild rice. Are there any other panelists that have any other additional information?
Now, this is Frank Edowagishik, and I know that most of the tribes in Michigan have had a process where they've been experimenting for a number of years in how to bring wild rice back into our regions. And there's been a lot of expertise that's been developed in terms of how to do it and how not to do it. And so it's a lot more than just a simple answer. But it has to do with water flow. It has to do with what type of rice it is, where the seed came from, where you want to put it, and a number of things. And I think that there will be resources available through the natural resource departments of many of the Great Lakes tribes that have information or have people who might be able to, much better than I, be able to answer that question with some detail.
Also just wanted to jump back in and say one more thing, that you can also help with rice by harvesting it. Harvesting wild rice is also helps to propagate the rice. Not every grain falls into the boat, and so that's seen as like a reseeding activity in and of itself. So I know that doesn't necessarily disperse the rice to other bodies of water, but just saying that getting out and harvesting that rice is also seen as beneficial to that process.
This is Frank, and I just want to, I saw something just came up on the chat about the University of Minnesota, and so I have a response to that. A number of years ago, when they were first starting to work on this, I was the tribal chairman at Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indians here in Michigan, and when we were asked to pass a resolution opposing this. And when we thought about it, we actually decided, instead of a resolution, we passed a law that within our jurisdiction, it was illegal to, it is still today illegal to patent genetic materials, organisms. And so we didn't exclude genetic research, but only the patenting, taking the profit margin profit out of it, the corporate profit, and trying to corner the seed, for instance. We'd heard a rumor that the GMO, the modified seeds, had been that those modifications, the genes had drifted from their patties into the wild rice, and the people who owned the patents were attempting to get because their genes were now in wild rice that was being sold. They wanted a cut of the profits from the wild rice that was being sold. And so we felt that that was just completely an outrageous thing to do. And so in our tribe, we made it illegal to patent genetic organisms. And other people have taken different approaches to it, but we approached it in that way. A copy of that, I believe, is going to be on the website. Rochelle, is that correct?
Yes. Okay.
A copy of that statute will be on the website for you to look at, to see how we went about doing that. Of course, what it really did is it made it illegal for our tribal government ever to cooperate with somebody who was working on patenting materials, and also for them to not be able to enforce their patents in our courts under our laws.
Excellent. That's extremely helpful. Thank you, Frank. And that's part of the action items that we hope to get out of this, as ways that individuals can engage with their tribes to help to pass similar resolutions with their own tribal councils to help to protect our rice. This discussion really could have its own hour, and there are a lot of these kinds of initiatives happening that are not in conjunction or have approval by the Indigenous peoples whose traditional food that they are threatening. This genetic modification, for example, it goes directly against everything that Indigenous peoples believe in. So a lot of tribes have taken serious issue with this, and I'm sure a number of them have taken it upon themselves to take action on that. I was hoping to have some time in the background in the middle here to be able to look up a little more about that to share at the end here, but unfortunately I was just constantly going here. So in that regard, we will have a list of everybody that participated today. If I would like to start a listserv with those emails, so that way we can keep in touch, we can engage that way, we can share more initiatives on the rice. I can share the recording there as well, but it would be a great way for us to open that channel of advocacy and partnership, and so we can all support one another in our different initiatives to protect the wild rice. And in reference to the website that we have talked about earlier, and Frank just referenced as well, iitc.org will have give us till the close of business today, but we're going to make sure that the resources mentioned, PowerPoints that were shared, resolutions, and everything that is a part of the webinar today that's been either referenced or shared, we're going to have there for you so that you can continue. We hope you can get this recording out to people so that we can continue to reach those interested in hearing about this wild rice. So just finally, I want to say, because we received this email from Ian Tran, and we really appreciate your comments in the chat. And he also posed some questions that unfortunately we just do not have time for. But I will bring those back in the email follow-up, and we can hopefully have a robust discussion there. So thank you, Ian. Thank you for all the panelists or participants that sent questions and had comments. So we've got 5 minutes. I think we have enough time for everyone, or for our hosts to say some final words, and then Frank will be doing the closing invocation for us. So I just want to personally thank everyone from the bottom of my heart for joining us today. And with that, I'm going to pass to Lisa Bellinger, co-host, for her final conclusions. Miigwech, you have the floor, Lisa.
Miigwech, oh, what an amazing morning. I'm just looking forward to being able to gather together, and I have to tell you, I'm starved for wild rice at this point. But I want to say, a big thank you. And I know my niece was scheduled to be on here. I seen her on here for a minute. And I think that her input was, it's going to be greatly missed, because she had the talk about the Dakota, some of the historical points about Dakota and relationship with wild rice, where they're at with access. And the rice beds now are pretty much all in Ojibwe territory, when it was traditionally or historically Dakota lands. And right now, unless they have a special arrangement or agreement with one of the Ojibwe tribes, they have to rice on state lakes. And if you rice on a state lake, you have to pay the state license, which is kind of spendy. And so, with this resolution or the document that outcome from this webinar, I'm hoping that there'll be some support towards, for Indigenous people, Dakotas, to be able to rice in their traditional homelands without having to pay. And maybe that's already there. I really don't even know, but I mean, that's an issue. Is how do we open up access? And can we create intertribal agreements between Dakota communities and Ojibwe communities? So if they want to go rice up in Michigan or Wisconsin and Bad River, Mike, that they'll be able to access the tribal ricing license as easily as a Bad River tribal member, or same thing in Leech Lake. And I'll talk to my tribe. But, just some small issues like that might help with access. And I also know for anybody, and if any of the panelists are interested, I do know that she told me that her tribe, the Lower Sioux Dakota Sioux community and the Prairie Island Indian community, both have a wild rice restoration project. And I know they have rice down here in Prairie Island near the cities, and they're trying to reintroduce rice. I seen it when I went down there for their maple sugar camp. So, just acknowledging that Dakota and Ojibwe lifeways are really similar, because we share homelands, so ricing and maple sugar. It was interesting. I co-taught a pre-K class with a Dakota classroom, and we actually did our curriculum together for the whole year. And the only difference was language, pretty much, and maybe beadwork style when we were doing beadwork. But even then it was, they have floral as well. So, and then I just want to say miigwech to everyone. One of the things that I really enjoy about ricing, one of the greatest things is the wild rice, the miigwech Minomin days. We usually have a wild rice harvest festivals that happen all around Anishinaabe King, and it was great trading times. Nowadays it's great powwow times, but sadly not this year. Well, I don't know, maybe we'll see what happens. But again, a special shout out to everyone, and miigwech for our presenters, miigwech for our participants, and to remind you, if you need a CEU, we'll have, this will be with 4 CEUs, and you just email Michelle or Rochelle and myself, and we'll get that out to you, and you all have a great, great rest of your summer. Here's to you, Guinea, Tom, Frank.
Oh. Well, I wanted to thank everybody as well, and thank the presenters. One of the great things about being one of the organizers is you get to invite many of your favorite people to be here to speak. And so it was a real joy to be part of this. And I wanted to just give a real quick summary of what I thought things had happened through this. And that's, you know, I think starting with Jerry and Katie and talking about, you know, the personal responsibility that we all have is the most important one. That relationship we have with the natural world, with the Creator, with all the spirit beings and our ancestors. That relationship is of paramount importance, and that's the most important one for us. And for us to be dealing with those is you know, to find ways to honor those ancestors and to think of those coming generations. That's a really important thing. In addition to dealing with that, however, we have a lot, you know, it's no secret that the majority population around us is not Anishinaabe, or it's not Dakota. It's not that population, as what somebody said, they think in Washington, they think they're controlling everything. Well, it's not just in Washington, it's in the township clerk's offices, it's in the county boards, it's in, you know, state governments and other places where they need guidance. Sometimes they're really receptive to that guidance, and sometimes we have to go to court and we pay attorneys a lot of money to help us convince them of the rightness of our ways. But nevertheless, the idea to think about this is that, you know, that we have this personal responsibility, but then in addition to that, we have, as tribal citizens, we have the responsibility to help make our own governments responsive. And sometimes that's a struggle. There are times when our own governments are you know, not necessarily doing things the way they ought to be, and they need to do things. So the example we did when we passed the law about patenting organisms. But so not only do we have the tribal governments, but then we also have to deal with township governments and city and these others. We have to be involved at these levels to help guide local policy. At the same time, those things, we're dealing with state policies and state laws and doing cooperative ventures and working on the environment. And then that gets us to the federal level, where we have a lot of different issues over different administrations. And we need to have the kind of things that are going to come out of this. There's going to be recommendations on how we go about doing some of these things. And that will be information that comes out of this conference. And we're looking forward to that. We have some of those in resolutions that you know, that our various intertribal organizations and the International Indian Treaty Council have passed. Also through the National Congress of American Indians, for instance, and others. But then there's the international level. And June did a great job of bringing that international level in. And so many people don't think about that international level. But what happens at the Convention on Biodiversity? What happens at WIPO, the World Intellectual Properties Organization? Those things have a definite effect on our ability to work with each other, to work with other indigenous peoples, and to work with the governments of the nation states of the world that often do not take us into consideration. We need to be able to do all those things. So it's when we think about this, what comes out of this, the most important thing is that personal responsibility and that cultural personal responsibility. But paired with that is also this idea of working on the trying to affect the policy of all of those other governments with whom we have to have that we have to work. I thought that Chairman Wiggins did a great job of bringing bringing
guidance on
some of those things
that
to
march.
bear. And
We're
I've
trying to
heard Chairman Wiggins speak to the Region 5 director of the EPA in an absolutely marvelous way that combined both traditional teachings and the drawings and everything with chapter and verse of federal law that he was trying to make sure that they understood. It's that kind of stuff that we need to pay attention to, and I'm real pleased to be able to have been a part of this. I think it's a great it's been a great thing. I look forward to reviewing the tape of this and be able to where I'm can be revisiting all of the great teachings and great thoughts that everybody had here. And Rochelle, do you have another word before we close?
I did want to just take a moment to acknowledge the International Indian Treaty Council staff, Chris Honani in particular, who's been working very hard behind the scenes to ensure that today's webinar went smoothly. So I wanted to say Chimigwech to him and to everyone who joined us today, and I'll pass it back to you, Frank.
Okay, well, we think about those, we think about all those ancestors that have come before and those spirit beings that are with us every day. And we think about those four directions. We think about those teachings that come through those four directions and that balance that we try to maintain at all time. And it's always good to, while we opened with a song, I think we're going to close with one as well also that honors those four directions and that gives thanks for all those beings that have joined us. Miigwech Indigo, heya, heya, heyda, heya, heya, heyda. 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 Oh, miigwech, thank you. Thanks everybody for being here. And Rochelle, we're all done.